All the second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with Buddy.
What do you get when you try to help people understand the laws that are affecting their lives and families?
Don't give me that politics, Jazz. It's not my racket.
HBR Talk with Hannah Wallen. The concept of centrism is explained by Encyclopedia.com as a tendency to avoid political extremes by taking an ideological intermediate position. The article goes on to point out that political centrism is, by definition, a relational concept, basically because what constitutes the center of a spectrum depends on where the ends are. A centrist, defined by Merriam-Webster as a person who holds moderate views, is not necessarily wrong. For instance, the center position between complete pacifism and an aggressive warmongering police dog position in which a country like the United States gets militarily involved in other nations' conflicts to promote its own interests would be to take the position of supporting military preparedness with the stipulation that force would be used only in the nation's own defense against a direct and compelling attack. Such a position would probably be looked at as pacifism by warmongers, but as warmongering by full-on pacifists. In reality, it would be more balanced than either of those, sort of a sleeping dog position. But what if there were no pacifists? In a world where the spectrum of ideas regarding military force was self-defense only versus aggressive meddling to promote the nation's interests, what would be the centrist position? Quite likely it would be a standard regarding which of the nation's interests merited aggressive meddling versus which cases of meddling would be considered overreach. But the outlook would still be pro-meddling, sort of a junkyard dog position. And what if there were no aggressive meddlers? In a world where the spectrum was no military force versus direct self-defense only, what would be the centrist position then? That would likely be a standard regarding how much external aggression and meddling the nation should tolerate before responding with military force, versus which case of self-defense would be considered an overreaction. But the outlook would still generally oppose the use of military force, sort of a dog that sleeps with one eye open position. Were the two foes centrist to encounter each other, each would consider the other an extremist for being outside their considered spectrum of ideas. They'd both be wrong. Calling a position centrist doesn't determine what is actually extreme. Functional centrism wouldn't necessarily be a point on the grid, but instead a selection from the full spectrum of ideas promoting the beneficial and rejecting what's counterproductive. What if a nation was largely pacifist and mostly practiced non-interference, but openly kept apprised of building threats, and openly displayed its capacity for force as a deterrent? How would the world have been different if America were always the dog that sleeps in the sun with one ear to the ground and one eye open? How would the lives of men have been different? What would be the centrist position between that and where we are now? Would it be better by virtue of taking the middle ground? The laziest centrism of all is what I'd call pathological centrism. Dictionary.com's definition of the word pathological includes caused by or evidencing a mentally disturbed condition, and cites hoarding as an example, indicating that useful behavior, like storing some extra resources in case of an emergency, can become evidence of a mentally disturbed condition if overdone or done to a detrimental degree. Merriam-Webster's definition of the word includes being to such a degree that is extreme, excessive, or markedly abnormal, and cites pathological liar as an example. Both fit my usage here. Pathological centrism is centrism taken to an extreme or excessive degree wherein the condition of being centrist is more important to the individual than following the principles of functional centrism, such that it becomes detrimental to rational assessment of the merits of political ideas, often out of an irrational fear of being associated with tribalism. In the face of conflicting beliefs, the pathological centrist seeks to find a comfort zone regardless of the implications of the ideas he or she espouses. This usually involves ignoring nuance that differentiates between the natures of generally opposing positions to focus on their labels or oversimplified straw men of their outlooks. Where do we hear this the most?
MRAs and feminists are just two extreme sides of the same coin.
You guys know the drill.
The MRA is just a backlash against feminism. You both say the same things. You're just as bad as they are. You're both wrong.
Why do we need a male version of feminism?
MRAs just want to take away women's rights. Oh, so you think men are the ones who are oppressed?
And then there's the notorious,
yes, feminism has made a mess of things, but men's rights isn't the answer.
I especially love when I ask people who throw that last one at me, yeah? Well then, what is the answer? And they respond with a description of the general goals and interests of the men's rights movement. That betrays a partial basis for their pathological centrism, inaccurate views of the movements themselves. Many people see feminism as a women's rights movement that has spent the last century fighting to reform law and policy and social conditions under which our male-dominated society has been oppressive to women,
and has only recently gone too far because they just didn't realize when they'd achieved everything they originally set out to do.
That is probably the most common misconception I hear about the movement. It's not always held out of ignorance either, but sometimes a result of willful blindness. Many of the same people have no idea why there is a men's movement, much less what it entails. It's a very uncomfortable thing for them to examine once they do begin to find out what men's issues are. It's often even harder for folks to confront the fact that any need for reform exists because of laws in place today as a result of past feminist lobbying. Accepting that means accepting that in women's name, feminists persuaded our society's leadership to throw men under the bus. The next logical step is to wonder, how did we let that happen? That's ugly, and it comes with a built-in guilt trip that your average citizen doesn't want, might not even be equipped to take. So we encounter people who can't or won't. They put on their blinders, duck their heads, and limit their perspective to view the two movements as opposite ends of a continuous political spectrum, a zero-sum human rights game between the sexes, each fighting to get law and policy passed
to reserve all the rights
for their sex, while denying the other. Their avoidance response to reform advocacy often takes the form of drawing false equivalence between damage done and measures taken to repair it, or at least to stop it.
You're the same. You both advocate for changes to law and policy using the victim label.
Not only are they incorrectly equating recognition of wrongness to victimhood, but they're also incorrectly labeling all victimhood invalid. This is much like demonizing a long-bullied kid at the park who finally stands up for himself, calling him equally violent and demanding that he stop. But what would happen if he did? The truth is not so simple as these particular critics would like. The described law and policy already exists, created in women's purported interests, operating to men's detriment. Attempting to dial it back isn't aggression, it is defense against the damage it is currently doing. If activists working toward reformation give up because they're being accused of doing that which they're attempting to undo, what happens? The bad laws remain, and the damage continues. The picture the pathological centrist misses here isn't just bigger, it's entirely different. It's not even all along a straight line. Feminism and the men's rights movement both touch on another spectrum: full recognition of and legal consideration for human rights versus a totalitarian society in which no consideration is given to human rights at all. That lives in a political environment in which the preferred manner of defending and promoting human rights considerations is under debate along other axes: authoritarianism versus anarchy, collectivism versus individuality, altruism versus self-interest. And all of that is housed within the context of common understandings of what constitutes a human right, and those understandings have been constantly in flux throughout the evolution of human civilization. Our conflict isn't over whether one sex or the other deserves greater recognition of their rights, but over whether the concept of human rights should be gendered or universal. Feminists have pushed for a gendered outlook on human rights wherein excluding men and boys from consideration, legal protections, legal recourse, and social accommodation would be accepted whenever doing so would advantage women. Men's rights activists aren't pushing for the polar opposite, but for an outlook that includes both sexes and involves rational discussion on human rights. MRAs do not seek to flip the sexes regarding exclusion from the human rights dialogue, but simply to bring men and boys into it. We recognize that a condition defined as a human right must apply to all human beings. If it cannot be applied to all humans, it's not a human right, but a special privilege. Human rights merit protection as part of a general social order. Special privileges do not. For this, we get called extremists by both feminists and pathological centrists. Like feminists, the men's movement isn't a monolith, but unlike feminists, we should be able to admit that we have that one central pillar around which we can unite. And based on that pillar, we can, as a movement, maintain enough common ground to advocate for legal reform. We don't all have to agree with the current relationship between marriage and the state to be able to agree with each other that family law shouldn't incentivize one sex to initiate divorce and engage in malicious prosecution. We don't all have to be rugged individualists to recognize that a falsely accused man isn't made guilty by virtue of other men's criminal acts. We don't have to consider men victims of everything to recognize that areas of law and policy that do discriminate constitute a raw deal. And we don't have to wear masks that other people slap onto us to give themselves the illusion of having properly understood and accurately judged us. We don't have to be chained down by misconceptions or discouraged by lies. We have enough to handle combating the propaganda of junkyard feminists who aggressively hate on the movement because they don't want to lose their advantage. I'll be doggone if I'm going to sit by while people do it just to make themselves more comfortable. Talk about barking up the wrong tree. Just wanted to let that dog finish. Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 70. Just wanted to let that dog finish. How the hell did I get? That's funny. I didn't even have that open until
846. HBR Talk 846.
Yeah, no, it just I managed to. I don't know what I even clicked on, but I managed to open the live stream on the computer that I never have the live stream open in. But welcome to technical difficulties with the Badgers. Somebody was saying earlier today. Yeah, somebody was saying something earlier in the stream about things going wrong. I literally have not been able to do a single thing today without having to overcome or fix something that was malfunctioning, dysfunctioning, broken, whatever. It's just like everything that every task I've had today has had the added step of repair, replace, reset, redo.
Let me guess. You're the reason why Reddit was down 10 minutes ago.
Oh, Reddit was down 10 minutes ago? Oh my gosh, that's such a terrible loss. Nobody would be able to see the Red Pill subreddit. Oh wait, they quarantined that. Yeah. But,
rightly so, those men there enjoy sex with women.
Yes, that's just
they
rape culture.
Take active steps to do things in such a way as to make women want to have sex with them.
That's just pathological.
Disgusting.
Or pathological or something.
Disgusting.
Yep. Disgusting. But and yeah, so for the commenters in the chat,
how dare you?
One of the things that went wrong in the last 24 hours was I have laundry as one of my work-related tasks, and normally I'm doing laundry for a house that is sort of allergy-proofed. And this time I did laundry for a house that wasn't allergy-proofed, so I used scented fabric softener, which I haven't been exposed to in a long time.
Oh no!
Yeah, and I honestly, the last time I had a reaction to it, it was bad, but it wasn't this bad. So yeah, I don't even use fabric softener at my house. So yeah, I haven't been exposed to it in a long time.
You must not inhale. You're not supposed to inhale, Hannah.
I didn't inhale, and I didn't like it. Oh wait, that's backwards.
I have neighbors that when they're doing their laundry and I take my dog outside, I'm just blown away. I mean, their house is they're two houses away, but when they are using their dryer,
Yeah.
and it's
it
all
gets
like,
you.
oh my God, they use Snuggle or some shit.
Oh, the one that really
Anybody
hits
use
me.
that causes cancer.
Yeah, the one that really
Snuggle
seems to hit
struggle.
me is Gain, which really sucks because it smells so good. But it's I'm allergic to it. I'm allergic
Mountain
to everything.
Breeze.
Yeah. And it
Yeah,
smells like flowers and it's pretty and nice and I can't have nice things. So there's my whining for the night.
If you're not allergic to flowers, you should cultivate some English wallflowers.
There we go.
And then make a potpourri out of them and put them in a satchel in your dryer, and then we'll make your clothes smell beautiful. These are flowers that have such a strong, gorgeous. They're not that pretty to look at. They're nice enough, but they're not like gorgeous to look at. But the scent, it will actually carry across a large yard.
There you go.
And they just smell so good. Oh my God. English wallflowers. Do it.
Well, there's our advice, our household advice for the night. But back to the intro. Go ahead.
Can I interject?
Yeah.
I had a not a roommate, but another person who was renting a unit in the same house that I was living in, and they were Hawaiian. And the husband was actually like, landscaping was his career. But they planted Hawaiian ginger and all of these wonderful Hawaiian plants. Can you imagine just waking up and smelling that? It's absolutely mind blowing. But yeah, so
yeah, they can move next door to me, and I'll deal with allergies for those smells.
Yeah.
Oh, if you think this is bad though, you should see what happens if I get roses in my face. Like, I wouldn't be able to do the show tonight if I was exposed to the pollen or the oil from roses really heavily. That's
remember
bad.
I remember you reacting on the subway in London that one time.
Oh my God. Yeah, I can deal a little bit with other flowers, but holy shit, roses are bad. Which makes Valentine's Day really cheap.
Yeah, well, in all fairness, whoever was using that rose oil, whoever was wearing it, it was just overpowering.
They bathed in it, man.
The whole car, yeah.
Yeah.
They had a vat that they dunked themselves in and then sprang out again afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, roses are red and so is my nose. Get away from me, you stinky hoe. In any case, welcome to HBR Talk 70, Pathological Centrism, the polite barrier to reform. You are listening to your host, Hannah Wallen, here with she who must be obeyed, Karen Strawn, and nonsense annihilator Lauren B. to smash the mediocrity. Talk about the difference between rational moderate positions and the use of faux centrism as a shield against the harshness of certain political realities. Oh, and the extra allergy medicine I took is starting to kick in because I can breathe better now. But with that, let's have a moderate reminder. YouTube's glitches are getting weirder, guys. Subscribers not notified, streams dropped, feminists falling out of the sky, fabric softener hitting you right in the face. And if you want to keep up with what we're doing, you need notifications from badgerfeed.com. Register, receive notifications, be happy. And if you want to support what we do, even in the midst of all of the financial blacklisting that is taking place today, feedthebadger.com is the site for that. With Patreon hemorrhaging users and demonetization fairy stalking Google Ads users, Feed the Badger is the most stable way to support our work. Remember, Badger Feed for information, Feed the Badger to support our work. We're just confusing like that. Last thing, if you want the opportunity to nag everyone else into checking us out, don't forget to smash that like button and share us on every social media site you use. It'd be extremely helpful. And speaking of extreme, anybody willing to take a position on tonight's topic?
Oh boy, I was actually just having a brief conversation with an academic who suggested that we really need to rebrand ourselves. right? Like he's behind us and he is like fully on board with what we do and an admirer of our work and all of that stuff. But, the men's movement in general and the goals and all of that. But we really need some serious rebranding. And it's just like, I don't think that most people realize that MRA is not, it didn't start out as a self-applied label. It started out as a slur for men like Warren Farrell, who were talking about, who were trying to bring men into the discussion and the other side of the story into the discussion. And we just essentially, after a while, we were just like, okay, well, I'll wear that badge. Because, like the label stuck, right? Feminism wasn't even a self-applied label, right? When we call first wave feminists, that's a retroactively applied label to, that we slapped on the suffragettes. And it was a label that, was coined by somebody in 1837 or something like that to describe a certain point of view, right? But suffragettes weren't calling themselves feminists. So we're essentially looking at, we could choose a shiny new name that's like perfectly like, all of the focus groups, right, really like it, right? It'll just turn into a slur the moment we start using it. Just kind of the way, retard used to be the way you described people of limited intellect. And then when that became a slur, they changed it to moron, and then they changed it again, and then they changed it to special, and then they changed it. Now I think they're known as clients.
Actually,
right?
It's, well, like, and I work in the industry, and the term now is intellectual disability, and it covers a wide range of disabilities, from mental retardation to developmental delay and brain damage, and so traumatic brain injury that results in a loss of some of your initial capacity and stuff like that. So you can be intellectually disabled and be very, very disabled, and you could be intellectually disabled and simply have like a mild handicap that has developed because you got sick and had fever, high enough fever, or because you got hit on the head too many times. Technically once is too many times, but
what I'm saying is the language changes, right? So you have something like autism, which describes an actual set of a constellation of symptoms, right? And then people start flinging it around as insults against each other, and it acquires a stigma. It acquires a negative connotation. It's the reason why we still have organizations called the United Negro College Fund and, the NAACP, colored people, right? But we don't use those terms anymore because somehow the stigma we can outrun the stigma by constantly changing how we refer to things. And that is just not going to work. But that's a really centrist position, is that, it really is just all in the name. And it's not the fact that your philosophical opponents are going to smear you no matter what.
Steven Pinker wrote about that, you change the name and the attitude sort of catches up to it, and then you have to change the terminology again. And we do that with everything. We do that with words that are considered rude. We do that with words that are considered slurs. We do that with ideas that are considered mean, and so on. Sorry, I keep sniffing at everybody. That didn't last long. But in any case, there are some things in the blank slate that I'm like, maybe, but that is something that I've noticed in society just in my lifetime. And a really weird example of it was, how kids always, you give each other quote cooties in elementary school, and you treat them with noogies and all that stuff. When I was in the 5th grade, I think, my little community, small town USA, right, started to not be sheltered from news about AIDS enough that little kids heard heard about the disease and kind of had an idea of what it was and everything, and AIDS replaced cooties on the playground for like a year, and for some reason, one of the teachers got really offended by that. So then the cooties came back. So to this day, my classmates all still have cooties. But in any case,
every single one of them.
Yes,
Cooties,
yes.
Cooties are undefeated. They are the undefeated champion of the playground.
Yep.
Also, gross.
Yeah, yeah. And so, this kind of idea that if you take an idea that is hard for people to confront, and that there's something too painful about it, or too contradictory towards the individual's own worldview about it, and you rebrand it, it's not going to fix that problem. And the idea that you can just do that and it will fix that problem, it's probably the dumber end of centrism, honestly. And one way to tell that is, we've had people associated with our movement that are not part of our movement as a means of demonizing the movement, because the people trying to demonize the movement can't do it by citing things we ourselves have done, right? They try to falsely associate us with guys like Elliot Rodger because we don't have our own Elliot Rodger. And then they turn around and take individuals who call themselves MGTOW but are really just black pillars, and that's representative of the entire men's rights movement, and they're all bad and everything they say is wrong, and they don't have a reason behind any of it, even though the issues that they cite are legitimate, but it's just wrong to be angry about any of those things, right? And then you have, when they couldn't make MGTOW their boogeymen anymore, along comes Incel, and Incel is the new MGTOW for feminists. And the next thing you know, there will be, and then PUAs, almost forgot PUAs. But yeah, Incel is the new boogeyman for feminists.
Well, Incel's a very, very good boogeyman for them, like in terms of filling that niche.
Yeah.
Because it is, they flat out state, I'm involuntarily celibate, right? Like, they're not like MGTOW where it's just like, I could get laid, I could get a girlfriend, I just can't be bothered, I just don't want it. These are guys who describe themselves as like, I can't get laid, I can't get a girlfriend, I can't get a relationship, I can't even get friends, right? I am so socially dysfunctional that, sorry if you can hear slurping in the background, my dog is licking my toes. Yeah, no, they like, so, and they really do have a lot of dysfunction there. It is not just a matter of a guy making a calculated, rational cost benefit analysis and deciding to just not participate. There really is genuine anger there. There is genuine social and cognitive, I believe, dysfunction going on there. And so it really is a very, very scary boogeyman for them. And part of that is because Incel worries me, right? If Incel worries me, then yeah, it should worry everyone.
Yeah, it is. There's a point at which pain is going to lead to dysfunction no matter what. And the bottom line with involuntary celibacy is that there's gonna be pain associated with it. It hurts to be lonely. And the thing that really pisses me off is that feminists have the opposite response to that they should have, right? If this is women, if there was a large group of women complaining that they,
you mean like fat women?
Yeah, that they were at the short end. What do feminists do with fat shaming? They turn around and shame everybody else for not accommodating women's lack of attractiveness. They turn around and shame everybody else for having preferences and boundaries, right? But as soon as it's men, not only does their compassion disappear, as soon as it's men, their compassion completely disappears,
and it's replaced with not just contempt, but outrage at their entitlement to be treated like human beings, just like everybody else.
Well,
And
what's so frustrating for me about incel is that it is not just about, some guys who can't get laid, because women are they act as social proof, right? When women consistently reject a guy, when a guy cannot even get a girl to talk to him, for more than 30 seconds at a bar, right? Everybody essentially says to themselves, well, there's obviously something wrong with that guy, and they all avoid him like the plague. And when you look at actual social deprivation, right? Actual serious social deprivation of the kind, and if you wanna hear a freaking read a horror story, Google the name Jacqueline Brewer, and I believe she was in New Brunswick, and she was a 2-year-old girl who was essentially ignored to death. She died in her crib after 6 days of not having anything to drink, let alone eat. After 2 years of life in the crib without being interacted with. So she was 2 years old, did not know how to walk, could not stand up on her own, could not sit up on her own. Her parents completely ignored her. It appeared to be semi-targeted neglect. They weren't great parents with their other 2 kids either, but they seemed to have taken better care of them than her. And when you look at what happens to kids who are deprived, not just of food and water and shelter and clothing, right, but who are deprived of physical touch, who are deprived of social interaction, it actually causes a condition called psychosocial dwarfism. These children who are deprived of social contact and social interaction stop growing. They stop growing. Even if you feed them, even if you give them everything that their physical body needs, if you stop giving them physical touch and social interaction, right, they don't grow and they waste away, right? And so when you look at how that affects children when they're growing, right, when they're developing, right, that it can actually cause a form of dwarfism, right, to never be touched, to never really be interacted with in a social manner, right, all of that stuff. I have to wonder, right, is further isolating incels the way to go?
no, it's exactly the
Well,
opposite.
no.
It's essentially saying women have rejected these guys, and because women rejected them, all the men around them treat them like they're radioactive poop, okay, and don't want to have anything to do with them, lest Susie over there think, oh God, he's hanging out with like Jimmy the incel. Oh my God, maybe he's got something wrong with him too, right? And then so these guys get completely freaking socially isolated, and then on top of that, you have the entire society, not just feminists, essentially saying, well, the solution to this problem is to further isolate these guys through social contempt.
Yeah, and to throw this label at them and make them feel bad for being a thing when it's nothing that is. It's completely the definition of an incel is that this is a situation that they're in that is out of their control, and you want to shame them and blame them for something that they can't really do anything about.
It's cruelty.
I wouldn't say that they can't necessarily. Some of them, I'm sure, can do something about it. Alf's Void did a wonderful compassionate video recently, where she showed herself with makeup and without, and then she went through some before and after pictures of men who were unattractive, and then they got a different haircut and changed their fashion choices, right? And it was, it wasn't like they went from zero to hero in no time flat, but they did move up a couple rungs in the sexual marketplace by doing that, right? So there are some things that these guys can do. I think that, honestly, if you But there are some people, there are some women, I believe, and there are some men who are never going to be considered conventionally attractive, no matter how much makeup they put on, no matter how well they dress, sometimes no matter how much weight they lose or how much weight they put on, muscle that they put on, they'll never be considered conventionally attractive. But even if they're in a situation where they simply cannot get laid, right, that does not justify that further social alienation, which I think is, if these guys were able to make friends with people, right, after the constant rejection by women, right, if they were able to make friends with other people, have a social life, have social connections, get hugged every once in a while, all of those things, I don't think it would solve everything. I don't think it would solve every problem they have. I don't think it would be, oh wow, this is like utopia. No, it's not, because they're still not getting laid, they're still not getting a relationship, but it certainly would not do them any harm.
Well,
right?
there's actually
harm.
Just from what I've seen in my life, because I've always been sort of a social outcast, not to the degree that like I didn't have a word for it when I described it for the first post I wrote about Gamergate, when Gamergate sort of exploded. But the guys below the last rung on the social ladder are essentially incels. And I've always been in among the crowd that hung out with those guys. And my groups of friends at school and everything, and I've always sort of spanned between that area of the social spectrum and up to the sort of top nerd area when there was no level of nerd that was popular. And that was just me, because I'm caustic and sometimes clueless and blunt, and I don't spare people's feelings when I should. So I'm like Liza Doolittle at the racetrack, right? In My Fair Lady, where everybody else is all politely spoken and quiet and everything, and she tells the horse to move its bloody ass at top volume in front of everybody. And so I kind of have had a front row seat, I guess you could say, to the way people treat guys who are outcasts. And very few women get this treatment. But guys that get this treatment, it builds on itself. And it's sort of, there's a degree to which they can do something about it, and then there's a degree to which the social ineptitude can combine with the emotional weight, really. It can be very crushing to be rejected over and over again. Like feminists talk about microaggressions, I would say incels experience something I would term rejections, where there are subtle ways in which people treat them differently. They're not necessarily something that you would react to the way feminists react to the idea of microaggressions, which they ripped off from race theories. But the micro-rejection thing, it's actually, it just like adds a straw to the camel's back every time they interact with somebody, and that person pulls away from them, and it feels like drowning, right? You have one connection to oxygen, one connection to getting back on land, and it's leaving. What do? You don't want to grab and don't let go, because they treat that like, now you're creepy. But if you don't, they're going to go away. And if you try to get a direct interaction with someone, even just as much as, a smile from the cashier at the grocery store, who's avoiding looking at you for whatever reason, it's very cruel. And I've seen it hit guys like a very harsh burden, and I can understand why it would. to sort of be treated like you're a disease. And when I've watched this happen, I get pissed off when women start throwing the word creep around at guys for being in this position. And I went on a rant on Twitter over this the other day, and believe it or not, the women that were in the chat that I went on this rant, like I pointed out a lot of the various, creep shaming factors that women engage in. And the first thing I got was some damn feminist. Oh, so you want men to be able to rape women? I didn't even say anything about rape.
Oh my God!
I seriously.
Just fucking look a man in the eye and talk to him in a friendly manner in public. Like,
that's apparently rape. That's so extreme.
When he asks you what time it is, look at your watch or your phone and don't tell him, well, there's a clock 2 blocks over that way, right? Because we're living in a society, according to George Costanza. And, so why wouldn't you look at your watch rather than tell someone to go look at a clock way over there?
Yeah. So we're living in a society where treat men like they're a human being. Even if you're not sexually attracted to them and you don't plan on getting romantically involved with this particular guy, treat him like he's a human being. That's an extreme position. It's extreme now to say don't treat every stinking little thing a guy could possibly do as evidence that he is a creep. That's extreme.
Oh God, yeah.
We have trained women that they need to be afraid of men. So now everyone's looking at these men who maybe can or cannot find a mate, and they're all looking at them like, oh my God, these guys, they're just waiting to fucking rape me. Men are human,
they're sexually entitled because they complain about being lonely, right? Like women don't fucking complain about being lonely. I literally have a friend of mine who's like 38 years old, and she's just like out of her fucking mind because she cannot find a relationship. Right? She's trying everything, and it's just like, but I think it's honestly, she left it too long. And so now any guy that she approaches is going to know that she's going to want to have kids right away. So there's no kind of 5-year easing into that decision period. Let's get to know each other really well before we jump off that cliff thing. Right? And so she's losing her fucking marbles. Right? She's really having a hard time. And I am literally just like, there are all other than the fact that she has a deadline and these guys don't, the complaints are the same. I can't find somebody. I can't find somebody suitable. I can't find somebody who's willing to put up with my foibles. I can't find somebody who's willing to put up with my quirks. I can't find somebody I'm attracted to who is also attracted to me, who I would want to spend any amount of time with, let alone the rest of my life, right? I mean, and we have sympathy for that woman. We do not have sympathy for that man.
Not only do we have sympathy for that woman, but we live in a society where people are taken seriously, shaming men for both pursuing her and not pursuing her.
Yeah.
And I found my rant. I talked about it. I found it. I had this woman, the argument was, one of the guys had pointed out, approaching women is hard because the rules on what is appropriate keep changing. Like one day, or one generation, you are expected to be chivalrous. The next generation, chivalry is insulting, and then the following generation, you're back to chivalry is required, and if you assume they're going to be insulted by it, you're misogynistic now, and it's things like that. The women that responded to him responded with all this outrage, like, how dare you notice these things? And one of them responded
That's why
to...
I hate PUAs.
Yes.
PUAs notice things.
Yeah, and they kept... Well, just like they hated Trump's grab him by the pussy comment. That comment set off, the reaction that it set off not because he was acting entitled,
not
but because he
said grab him by the pussy, but because he said
they'll let you do it.
They let you.
Right.
Exactly.
But the reason they let you do it, because if a woman is a gold digger, and to a certain degree, the vast, overwhelming majority of women are gold diggers, and yes, I have told my son this. It's society teaches girls that they should grow up to be gold diggers. That has to stop. At least if they want to be equal. But the fact that a wealthy man noticed that a woman's standards for what behavior she finds acceptable from a guy, for what ways she will interact with him and everything, can be changed. Depending on his financial status and his social status and stuff. You can't talk about that. You talk about that, you are misogynistic. How dare you? Shame on you for noticing that. And that's an exercise or abuse of power, noticing that, right? And then, of course, we had the massive pussy hat temper tantrum, where the nasty women talked about wanting to blow up the White House. But in any case,
that wasn't extreme or anything.
No, that's not extreme. It's totally extreme to call incels human, but it's not extreme at all to respond to a guy noticing that some women's gold digging leads to changes in their standards for politeness, depending on your finances. That's not extreme at all. To want to blow up the White House because a guy noticed that and spoke it.
You're not allowed to accurately represent reality.
Right. Not when it's insulting or not flattering to women, actually. It doesn't even have to be insulting. It just has to be not flattering. And again, extreme, not extreme. So we have, I'll read this off and then I'm going to hit some super chats. The response led to a discussion between women in the thread regarding liking to be pursued versus not liking to be pursued. And it's sort of drawn along the lines of feminists versus everybody else. Feminists will admit to liking to be pursued and then condemn every man for every way that he possibly can do it. And one of them actually comes out, and the other girls in the thread were all saying, well, no, we do like to be pursued. This isn't creepy. This isn't nasty. And if it's not somebody that we were looking for to pursue us, we can communicate a rejection. We can decline their advances, and that's not actually all that hard. You want to be as nice as you can about it, right? But it's not like mountain climbing. It's not like speaking another language. No is really a short word. It only has 2 letters, so, but we end up with this commenter claiming that the idea was outdated. It's not the 1950s anymore. Like, feminists always say that. It's not all of history is the 1950s. That's the other thing that gets me. They were, what is it? Women like to be pursued idea is an outdated concept from a time/culture where women were shamed for appearing too eager. So like that came from the outside and wasn't, don't.
It didn't have anything to do with women's inherent cost, risk, benefit analysis in the biological freaking consequences of sex.
Don't make yourself too vulnerable.
Be a little more cautious about sex while men are a little more cavalier about it. Yeah, nothing to do with it.
Yeah, no, and the idea that women were culturally encouraged to put up faux resistance. No, that's real resistance. There's no such thing as faux resistance. There's coyness. But and flirtation, but that's, in any case, I got really annoyed. I don't usually get annoyed on Twitter, but that pissed me off, and I just kind of went on a rant. Yeah, women really shouldn't expect men to put any effort into earning their attention anymore. That's over. It's the current year. It's not anyone's job to demonstrate to you that they might be of interest to you. If you want a relationship,
I propose.
What?
I propose a system. I'm not going to be a pathological centrist here. I'm going to go to the exact opposite end of the scale. If women ever want to have sex or relationships, they need to put on a short skirt, get out their pom-poms, and do the pursuing, and make it enthusiastic so that it'll stick in court that she actually consented to climbing him like a fire pole.
Oh, there's more to it than that, though. This is the other thing I said, and this is what pissed off the feminists in the thread, right? That's fine. If you want a relationship, you should pursue him. But, and then this is my big but, so everybody listen to my big but. If you're going to do that, ladies, you really ought to follow all of the same rules to which men have been subject. This means, right, if he's not interested, you're a creep. If you're too fat or too thin or your nose is too big, you're a creep. Too poor, you're a creep. Unpopular, creep. If he's interested and you don't hit on him, you're still a creep. If he tries to be coy and you don't catch on, that's creepy too. If he seems openly interested but he's really just afraid to tell you no because of what some other gal did, yep, you're still a creep. If you find the contradictory nature of any of the rules intimidating, that's a creepy level of social awkwardness. If you don't understand the rules for engaging with a guy you met today aren't the same as the last guy you met, that's a creepy level of stereotyping. If cultural differences of any kind make your interaction awkward, you're a creep for not knowing whatever it is you didn't know about his culture before you tried engaging with him. But you're also a creep for prying if you actually ask. Oh, and if your cultural backgrounds are dramatically different, that's creepy too. I mean, clearly, you're just fetishizing him for being of that culture and not of yours. Double that if you're white and he isn't. Triple if your native language isn't his native language. On the other hand, if you let any of that information deter you from pursuing anybody, it's not because you're avoiding being creepy, right? It's because you're racist. And that's creepy too. And be aware also that there's no place, no time, no environment which makes it appropriate for you to make the first move, which is now expected of you. One would think dating sites maybe, but no. If you're not what he is looking for, you're still creepy, if he has to tell you that. If all of this adds up to you not being able to get a date, guess what? That's creepy too. It's especially creepy. Yes, it's especially creepy if you would be up for a date, but you can't get one. And even more so if that makes you sad. Major creep fest, lady, if you actually have the audacity to complain about that. And before you ask, no, there's not really anything you can do that's not creepy, because one guy's rules of engagement don't represent the rest of the guys. So avoiding what got you labeled creepy by one guy might get you labeled creepy by the next. And complaining about that is also creepy, so just don't. And on a side note, if you respond to what I've said here by blocking and talking about it behind my back, by muting or by any kind of Twitter reply, that's creepy as hell. And it's also creepy if you do none of those things. And the first thing that I get out of feminists from this, out of the women in the thread responding to me, is, oh well, obviously you support rape. You're just engaging in rape apology.
I don't even like. I don't even understand this, and I'm just gonna say that I think that a lot of feminists' attitudes towards things like enthusiastic consent and asking for permission at every escalation and all of those things derives from an exact opposite paradigm within their sexual psyches. I have been with men who had sexual relations with feminists, right? Dyed in the wool, pick up a picket sign protesting feminists who have told me that if you want to be with a woman who likes to be spanked, who likes to have her hair pulled, who likes to be held down, rode hard, and put away wet, right? And then feel ashamed about it afterwards, maybe, but really enjoy it in the moment. Yeah, you go for a feminist with daddy issues.
Oh yeah, and it's funny because they'll be in public. They'll condemn everybody, right? Who has any interest in anything like that. But then
every single author on the author forum that I was part of, right? who wrote BDSM was a feminist and was mad at me for not saying that I was a feminist too.
Yeah. Then you're an extremist for it, right?
No, I was a horrible person because I called myself a gender equalist. And 350 furious comments from BDSM enthusiasts later, right? None of them writing erotic fiction about dominatrixes and their little submissive boys, right? All of it, Christian Grey and the whatever blonde cardboard cutout you can insert the reader's psyche into, right? Everybody knows who Christian Grey is. Everybody knows that the main character of that book was not the woman, because that's every woman, right? Nobody knows her name because they're all sitting there wishing it was them, right? And so they don't even remember her name, because remembering her name would remind them that she's not them, right? She's not me, so I don't even remember. But I remember his name, Christian Grey, and I remember he wears suits with silk ties and, you know, and Bruno Mali shoes, and he really likes to whip me with various instruments after he's tied me up and has me completely helpless and at his disposal, and he really wants to sexually dominate me and all of this shit, right? All of these authors who write these books are fucking feminists.
Mm-hmm. There's a power play there. You know, women who are in a position of power often, when it comes to the bedroom, likes to be dominated.
Of course, you want to set your fucking job as boss off to one fucking side for the evening, right? Mm-hmm. And on top of that, you know, like I don't necessarily want to set my job as boss of all things, she who must be obeyed, aside ever. Okay, but, if I'm going to be with a man, because, you know, I have the option of being with a woman, if I'm going to be with a man, he's going to have bigger pants than mine. I'm sorry, if I'm going to sexually respond to him, he's going to have bigger pants than mine in that one area of life, right? And that is why when the day that after I met him online and we'd talked for about a month, and then I met him in person, and I walked in the door of the freaking bar, and he was sitting there, and he looked at me, recognized me right away, because, you know, I'm just like, I'm the woman with the shortest hair in the room. And he looked at me like he was going to pounce on me and eat my internal organ. Okay, and I was
sounds eerily familiar. Go ahead.
I was like, oh, that ain't bad. And then I sat with him and we talked and we had a beer for 10, 15 minutes. And then he leans over and he says, he puts the money in the billfold. He says, I'm going to go use the washroom. And then when I come back, we're going to go to my apartment. Long pause. Is that okay? I'm like, fuck yeah. Like, yeah, of course it's okay. Jesus fuck, right? Why didn't you ask me that 5 minutes ago? So I mean, like, it was literally like, this is what women respond to. Most women, not all. Hashtag not all. Most women respond to this, right? Feminist women. I think they play this out in the bedroom because they refuse to acknowledge that there might be any other area of their lives in which they might want to play out that dynamic. They might want to let their man take the lead, right? So they do it all in the bedroom, but then they're so fucking ashamed of it.
Yep. Yeah. And you know, I think that it says something else about men, that they are looking for that enthusiastic consent. They want that. They want to know that you are in just as much as they are, you know?
Oh, hell yeah.
It's yeah, you know, that shit is hot. Okay. Sorry.
You know how many women I've talked to who found a guy who was going to, like, just essentially treat the bedroom as, I'm going to do what I want. You always have the right to say no, and I'm not going to hurt you, but I'm just going to do what I want.
Yeah.
Right? And what I want is to do whatever with you that I want, right? And the number of women I have talked to who said, I always had problems with like lubrication and stuff. Then I was with this guy who acted like that. And I never had that. I didn't have that problem with and, because there were some guys I was with that they would have to eat me out for like 2.5 hours, right? Before I was like ready to actually have intercourse. But like with this guy, he could just like literally flip me over and stick it in. And it's like, and I'm like, okay, well, see, that's all about attitude, honey.
Amen.
That's all about him desiring you. And he desires you so much that he doesn't care about, like, if he's going to eat you out, he doesn't care if he hits your clitoris. He doesn't care where that is. His mouth is all over the place. He's not doing it for you. He's doing it because he wants to. Right? Okay? Yes. And that turns women on. And it's like, doesn't matter how much skill he has. It's all about enthusiasm and attitude. Right? And it's like, and these women, they're like, all of a sudden I wasn't sexually dysfunctional. And I'm like, oh my fucking God, where have we gotten to? Like, we're back in the days of fucking Kinsey.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Is saying I interview men and women, couples whose doctors are telling them the only permissible sexual equation is penis plus vagina equals baby, and everything else is off limits, right? And I'm thinking, like, what the? How are you supposed to get enthusiastic about your consent if he says, do I have your permission to touch your boobie?
Yeah, exactly. So something that
we might be going to the other extreme here. I don't know, but it feels like functional centrism to me.
No, but you're right, and it's just, we are in a situation where we have to figure out how to functionally have these relationships between each other, and they don't look like normal relationships. They're not. We don't grow up your high school boyfriend anymore. It doesn't happen. So finding quicker and faster ways to connect with each other is absolutely helpful. And when you can express yourself and find a community where you can do that and feel comfortable, and you will find that people will be attracted to you and find you, and what I mean, be accepting of you.
Well, and most of all, in order for us to be able to have these conversations, those communities have to be able to form without somebody coming along and pointing fingers and yelling shame, shame on you for discussing men's sexuality in a positive way. Shame on you for discussing men's sexuality without castigating them for having an interest in women.
Right.
We cannot have...
and shame on you for suggesting.
Yeah. And most of all,
maybe the fastest selling book series, paperback series of all time,
is
might
indicative
reflect women's feelings about the topic of sex.
Right.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's carte blanche to do anything, without.
No.
But it definitely indicates that there's a different attitude than feminists are demonstrating. Well. If we can't talk about it, because every time we bring it up, we get, well, you're just playing victim of women's consent, like, or which they use the word consent when they mean refusal, but you're just playing victim of women's rejection. I don't know how many times in that thread women responded to me by accusing me of being a guy who was complaining about the way I have been treated by women. And to be honest, I probably have an easier time gaining women's interest than a lot of the guys I know. So even if I was in that situation,
the thing about it is that even if you were
even if I was
to be a man, doesn't that
make it
still
wrong?
but they can shame men into silence that way.
Yeah.
And then you get, when you point that out, when you point out that that is cruel and heartless and inhumane, and that it's actually an extreme point of view to castigate men for expressing their humanity.
Right.
You get hit with this you're just the same, you're just spouting a victim narrative, you're no different than they are, you can't talk about this.
Yeah, exactly.
And I got hit with that too in that discussion.
Yeah, and then exactly, and like, God forbid you be a woman that has any type of sympathy towards men. You're just, forget it. You are the devil incarnate. And
well, I don't know. There are very few women out there, very, very few women out there who, in addition to being incel, right? And I'm not talking about like unable to form relationships. I'm talking about like literally unable to find a man on Tinder to hook up with them, even for one night. Very, very few. I have dated men who were like, yeah, there were times when like I slept with women that like they're just because that was all there was, and I really needed to connect with somebody, and it was like, so I mean, like, women who are a 2 or a 3 can still get sex. Yeah, is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
not very often, whatever, but they can still get. But also, women who are a 2 or a 3 are not perceived as a threat, right? They're not perceived as a threat. They're not perceived as stigmatizing enough that they can never make friends, that they can never make human connections with other people, that they will never be hugged, never be touched by somebody. I mean, one of the things that I noticed after I started in this is how easily and casually I would touch my customers, right? The guests at the restaurant where I worked at, no matter where I was working, right? And no matter in what context, right? If I needed somebody to move out of the way so I could get by with a tray, I would touch their shoulder. Sometimes I'd touch their shoulder to, share a joke or whatever, or, I'd say something outrageous and then touch their shoulder or their forearm to let them know that I'm just kidding, right? Because I always enjoyed saying outrageous things like, they'll say, oh, can I get one more coffee? And I'm like, fine, I'll complain about it, but I'll do it, right? And, and then touch them and smile, right? To let them know I'm just joking. And touching for women is actually a way of putting people at ease, right? It actually acts as a way, that sort of casual touching your shoulder, touching your forearm, touching your hand, whatever. It's a way for women to put people at ease. Smooth. It's a social lubricant for women.
It connects you to the other person.
Well, within an in-group, it's the same with men, but outsiders are not.
The other person doesn't feel threatened by it, but I never saw male waiters ever put their hands on anyone.
Right. One of the differences, women seem to be part of everybody's in-group to a degree, whereas men aren't. Yeah, men are othered in society.
So men are deprived, even in those social interactions, of sort of just patting somebody on the shoulder or whatever, right? They're deprived of physical touch in ways that I don't think women understand. I think that even if feminists actually made a point of opening their eyes and observing the people around them and how they behave with perfect strangers, customers coming into your restaurant, people coming through your till at the grocery store, all of those things, right? They would see there's the very, very formalistic handshake for men, and that's it. That is it.
But they would look at that through an ideological filter rather than just looking at it.
Right. But like of course, socially the touch is absolutely it's a connecting thing, but
then you have to look at like, okay, so some freaking politician touched a woman's shoulder a few times,
right?
Neil deGrasse Tyson wanted to look at a woman's freaking solar system tattoo and touched her shoulder one too many times,
right?
And now he's being Me Too'd out the fucking wazoo.
Exactly. It's like, you say the word touch and it inspires, different levels of, reaction in different people. Touch is a healing thing. It is a very healing thing. Skin to skin touch. If you are naked with someone and you are just touching them, that is more healing. Even with babies,
your baby would rather sleep naked with you in a freaking ditch than in the most beautifully appointed nursery on the planet on the other side of your mansion, right? They would rather sleep skin to skin with you 100% all the fucking time. Raised 3 of them. Oh, I know it.
Yeah,
exactly. But we're so busy, trying to pit each other against, one another. And what we really need to be doing is coming together, because it is this healing touch that could really solve a lot of the fucking problems that we're having right now,
Yeah, and that's very much an issue of ideology being the filter through which all of these factors are viewed. And
right, and it touches on the whole incel thing as well. If people were willing to give of themselves instead of being so selfish, just talk to someone, just I'm not the most sociable person, I can count on one hand the amount of friends that I have that I can say live within a 10-mile radius, 1 mile radius of me, but it's the connections that we have with people. And it's you have to be able to connect with other people. So, oh God, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, no, you're all right. It sort of brings it back around to the topic, in that when you're dealing with, you have an extreme like feminism, and you have, and feminism is an extreme, because quite frequently, everything pretty much that we. Yeah, even moderate feminism is an extreme. You're right, because they're looking at everything through an ideological filter that reserves compassion strictly for female human beings, and obligation strictly for and responsibility and accountability strictly for male human beings. And that divide creates a gulf, a gap in the recognition of human rights. Like, we cannot have in our society a positive attitude toward equal human rights recognition as long as we have that extreme ideology being thrown at us. But we also have people who have spent the last, their entire lifetime living within that last couple centuries where feminism has sort of dominated the political outlook, right? So we've got it's normal to view it's normal to view feminist ideology, or feminists call it feminist theory, but it's not proved, it's not supported by evidence, it's just hypothesis that's being very well articulated and very effectively pushed, right? People are accustomed to that being mainstream belief. Like, I've actually had people be shocked to find out that, except for a short span of time after change of law in the UK, women could vote before the suffragette movement. They just had to meet the same standards that men met in order to vote. And there were numerous parts of the United States that became states with female voting rights as part of their state legislature, and it wasn't a black and white, all men could vote, no women could vote scenario, and then all of a sudden along came the suffragettes, and they just happened to fight just right, and women got their voting rights magically, right, with no help from men at all, including the men who were in charge and in control of whether women got their voting rights or not. They had nothing to do with it. It was all feminism. People are shocked to find out that's not true.
People are shocked to find out that that by, I think, 1895 or something, in the UK Parliament, in the British Parliament, women's suffrage had a majority.
Yeah.
And the reason why the I believe it was the Democrat and the Labor parties, Liberal Democrat and Labor parties, essentially said no, they voted every bill down, was because they were given bills that would only give women suffrage if they met the same standards that men met, which were property standards that would have essentially meant political death for political parties that represent the working class, right? So, because rich women vote the same way rich men vote.
Yeah.
Right. And so essentially rich women voted conservative, would vote conservative, just like rich men did. And the Labor and Liberal Democratic parties would have been freaking annihilated.
Well, anyway,
by doubling the conservative voting bloc.
And
people don't get it. People don't even get the fact that Benjamin Disraeli said, Britain will never live under a democracy in my time, hope to, God. That democracy itself was considered gauche and something to be avoided.
Well, the elitists still think that way. But in any case, when people learn this information, and the same is true with the information on domestic violence, the information on sexual violence, where they find out how feminists manipulated the statistics, and the fact that the statistics upon which the ideas of epidemics of intimate partner and sexual violence all over the world are based are fake, right? That not only are they fake, but they're fake specifically in the manner of being greatly exaggerated, and then also having the actual gender dynamics muted to avoid admitting female perpetration. All of these bits of information, their importance is, well, we have some laws that have been passed on the basis of this false information. We have some attitudes that have become normal social attitudes on the basis of this false information. With the Violence Against Women Act, we have you can't question feminism because women owe feminism their votes. We have women have always been oppressed by men and need a rights movement, and therefore we have to continue to accommodate feminist organizations in the political spectrum, and they speak for women. All of that, when people start learning the falseness, the scam basically that is involved there, they don't respond by turning against the scam a lot of times. Instead, they respond by turning away from the information. And I've actually had people respond to, I think nobody should hit anybody if we could just get domestic violence victims advocacy to a point where it would address the actual dynamics of domestic violence, the prevalence and perpetration, the actual dynamics of the continuing cycle of it from generation to generation, and help people who have developed a tendency to use violence as their primary means of conflict resolution to find other more functional and effective and less confrontational means of conflict resolution, so that they could actually have get past continuing conflicts in their families, and they could actually engage in disagreement without hurting each other and without hurting their children and things like that. The response is, why are you pro-beating women? Right? And this is considered the moderate position. Well, obviously you hate women because you're opposed to the feminist outlook on this. What do you mean you're questioning the Duluth model? Feminists have been telling us this for years, therefore it must be true. What's wrong with you?
Yeah. No, I saw this on Good Morning Britain. Right, with Piers Morgan. Peter Lloyd was on there, and some blonde feminist, and they were talking about the Gillette ad, and Piers Morgan and Peter Lloyd, of course, were quite offended by the ad, and the female feminist and the female co-host were in favor of it. And Piers Morgan essentially said, well, how would you feel about an ad that talked about the bad things that women do? Spent the first half talking about the bad things that women do, and spent the second half saying women can be good by holding other women accountable for the bad things that women do. right? How would you feel about that? And Peter Lloyd jumps in and says, oh yeah, no, I could write the treatment for that. I could totally write a pitch for that. Paternity fraud and false accusations and all of this stuff. And the feminist woman got furious. She got really angry, saying, well, how big are these problems? And it's like, how many women engage in those things? And it's like, it doesn't fucking matter.
Yeah.
Right?
If it's not a big problem, that means it's not a problem. Good, we should legalize cannibalism.
It's the exact same reaction that we got at Men's Rights Edmonton, right, to our "Don't Be That Girl" posters, right? There was a big, huge poster campaign. It was highly publicized. It was highly praised, right? If just because she's drunk doesn't mean she wants to fuck, right? Just because you help her home doesn't mean you get to help yourself, right? All of these things. Don't be that guy. Don't be that guy, right? And men, not just men's rights activists, but men were like, you're literally maligning all men, right? Mm-hmm. You're literally implying that all men need to be told not to commit rape, right? Otherwise they're going to do it. And then they just defended it by saying, well, if you're not that guy, then you shouldn't have a problem with this, mm-hmm. right? Okay, then we came out with our "Don't Be That Girl" posters. And what was their first? These same people, their first criticism, you're implying that all women lie about rape.
Yep.
You're implying that all rape accusations are false, that all women lie about rape. And it's like, how can you not see your double standard?
Honestly, my favorite poster out of that, and I still use it in discussion, is the one with the dumpster with the graffiti photoshopped onto it. Yeah, no babies, please. No babies.
Yep.
Well, and then there was one, right? I was interviewed by a journalist for CBC, right? That's Canada's public broadcaster, right? And she says, well, you had one poster that said, just because he has an erection doesn't mean he wants to fuck. Don't you think that using fuck might have been going a little bit too far, using that word? And I'm like, it's
that on the original
fucking copy of the original fucking poster, bitch.
Yep, it's extreme when we do it.
Who fucks? Nobody fucks. That's not a word. We can't use.
Yeah, no, we can't use that. And it's not like they used it in their poster campaign first. And we just replaced "just because she's drunk" with "just because he has an erection." That was the only change we made.
Yeah. No. We must be more articulate.
We use harsh language.
Yep. We must be more eloquent. You don't say "fuck you" straight to hell. It uses a condemn you, your sorry derriere to the bowels of Hades, to fiery condemnation with fornication upon you, and then people will feel better about it because other words for the same concept. Although that used to keep me out of trouble in junior high. If I wanted to cuss somebody out, I could do it without having a single swear word come out of my mouth.
No, just ask Dr. Random or Cam to come up with something. Give you a little freaking paragraph, write it down, and send it your way.
Yeah, but I never needed that. And the fun part though is when you do something like that, and then you watch the person turn to their friend. What did she just call me? And I actually, what was it that I called somebody a bleeding inflammatory wound upon the fundament. And of course I had learned from my grandmother that the fundament is an archaic term for anus, the anal opening, actually, the anal sphincter. So I called him a hemorrhoid.
Ooh.
And I'm like bellowing this out down the hallway because we'd been having an argument and I was angry with this guy. You bleeding inflammatory wound upon the fundament. One guy busts out laughing. I went out with him.
I really liked Anne of Green Gables, right? I'm sure you guys are familiar with it. But there was this one point where, the woman who, there's the love triangle going on, right? With Gorky, redheaded Anne, and the blonde, really attractive but bitchy chick, and Gilbert Blythe, right? And Gilbert Blythe does something that makes Blondie go absolutely fucking insane because he embarrassed her, and Anne just kind of looks at her very, very calmly and says, "I'm actually kind of amazed that anybody could do anything that would embarrass you."
Yeah, that's fitting.
It's a story about my dog.
Everything must be punctuated by the dog.
Yeah, well,
I'm surprised your dog didn't answer the dog at the end of the opening monologue. That would have been cute.
Oh yeah, no, I was muted.
That's good. But yeah, no. As soon as you start to pay attention to these topics, right? As soon as you start to say, all right, well, let's examine the dynamics of intimate partner and sexual violence. Let's look at what can we do to change the way we respond to the dynamics of domestic violence. Say women throw the first punch. Women, or even they're not punching, they're just backing a guy into a corner and poking their finger into his chest and haranguing him until he hits that breaking point and pushes them away. And all of a sudden he's an assailant and they're a victim, right? We gotta, if we ever want to stop that point from being hit, because that is an instinctive reaction, not always a conscious choice, not something that a guy always has control over, in particular after he's been abused in that manner, and it is abuse. He'll get to a point where his instinct is going to override his self-control. If we can acknowledge that, and we can actually start teaching both sexes better ways to handle conflict in a relationship, we can prevent the next generation from being exposed to that level of violence. One of the things Aaron Pitsey talked about, we can't talk about at all in the domestic violence victims advocacy industry, or in response to the industry, and in response to laws the industry has lobbied into place, is that children develop those tendencies of making violence their primary means of dealing with conflict because they experience it in the home. And it's not just they watch it happen and they learn to do it. There's a chemical change that takes place in the brain, and it starts in utero. If you have a woman who is pregnant and she is living in a situation where she and her guy, their primary means of dealing with conflict between their interest in any particular thing. Maybe they're arguing over money. Maybe they're arguing over which bills to pay first, or what they can or cannot afford, or whether or not she really needed that new tube of lipstick. And all of the anger and fighting and all of that goes with that creates a chemical change that goes right straight to the developing brain, and the baby is born with tendencies that would not have been present in a different environment. We can't examine these things and try to use them to change how our society addresses domestic violence, because we get called extremists, and we get called get accused of promoting wife beating, of misogyny and all that other stuff, simply for just bringing it up.
And it's ridiculous, because there have been studies that have shown that. So telomeres are basically the end caps of your RNA, right? So it has been shown that fatherlessness, if you don't have a father in your life, it reduces, or it shortens the life of your telomeres, which is your body's ability to reproduce your cells, your DNA inside your body, right? every 7 years, your body has completely regenerated in itself. So every 7 years, basically, you're a new person. But you know, sorry, brain fart.
Basically, no. It actually increases the rate at which people age.
Yeah, exactly.
And it also changes the manner in which people age. There is a degree to which, like, there was somebody that came out and actually said emotional distress causes cancer. Well, I'm not going to buy in necessarily to the idea that emotional distress, in and of itself, causes cancer, any more than I will buy into the idea that carcinogens, in and of themselves, are the only cause of cancer. I know genetic predisposition is an influential factor. My grandfather smoked for 40 years and never had a problem. I have other family members that, like, a few cigarettes and they get colon cancer. I can never ever smoke because probably I have inherited a gene that actually means if I expose myself to certain types of carcinogens, I don't have an increased chance, just an increased chance. I have a 100% chance I will get cancer, right? So there are different things, but clearly the influence of this kind of emotional distress is one of the contributing factors. And I can buy into that. I can accept that. The same thing happens with mental illness. The same thing happens with dysfunctional behavior. And again, there's that dysfunction in the pathological end of centrism. So what we end up with is we are in desperate need in the United States of reform in the Violence Against Women Act. We have this,
and it just got re-signed into law. It just got renewed by Nancy Pelosi, the specter of herself.
Yeah, but we have this.
She's like what, 112 years old,
something like that.
going on sealed coffin during the day, only comes out at night.
Going on 12. You know, you gotta have that's. But in any case, yeah, we have this. I don't know how else to put it, but Cthulhu-esque tentacle monster of laws, right? The Violence Against Women Act and Obamacare both had the same things going on. You get rid of the Violence Against Women Act, it is actually going to affect hundreds of other laws. Because the Violence Against Women Act has its tentacles in dozens of other laws that have their tentacles in dozens of other laws. Because we do this stupid thing in the United States where a law gets passed and it'll have, one little section that changes a section of another law or another law or another law. So, for instance, I talk about the Violence Against Women Act replacing the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act, which is a truncated way of describing what really happened. It didn't replace it, it updated it. But it updated it in such a way as its original form became defunct. So essentially it is a replacement. In any case, to be able to go through and say, all right, the Violence Against Women Act, here's the dysfunctional things. It has gendered our approach to domestic violence law. It has adopted the Duluth model as federal policy, and it imposes it on the states and on local police departments and all this other stuff. What needs to be changed is the Duluth model needs to be taken out of the Violence Against Women Act. The gendering of funding needs to be taken out of the Violence Against Women Act. And it basically needs to be stripped of those dysfunctional. We can't do that. We can't do that. And the reason we can't do that is because as soon as we start talking about the problem, what do we get? You're just using the same victim narrative that feminists use. You're as bad as they are. You're anti-woman. You hate feminism. You hate the progress that women have made. It's not like this kind of thing. We don't need more of what feminism created. We need to get rid of all of it. Well, you're not going to get rid of the Violence Against Women Act. It's not going to happen. The United States does not repeal laws. Very rarely do we get rid of laws. We change them, but we don't get rid of them. We should get rid of them, but we don't get rid of them. And so we end up with what Remy mentioned, well, we end up with a bunch of different things, but we end up with this false comparison, right? You're just as bad as they are. Okay, well, and let's examine that. How bad are they? How bad are they? What did they set up? They set up a system, a federally mandated system that considers men so much less human that the act of inflicting violence on them is considered less of an infringement on their autonomy, their human rights, okay? That's what they have set up. How is saying we shouldn't do that just as bad as setting that up? How?
Right. Agreed. And they've also set up a system by which the Violence Against Women Act can actually, they can actually say, well, we're only accepting grant applications from people who want to study violence against women.
That's dog for.
Oh my God! Violence against.
That's dog Kevin. For telling us who these people are that Karen's talking about. Remember that Kevin. There's a specific term for the type of canine that we are listening to. But go on.
Kevin is a girl, and then she gets Borat all riled up. I'm squirting her with water right now. No, like, so essentially they actually hold the purse strings for grant applications for research, and they have in the past, I don't know how frequently, but they have in the past essentially said, we're not going to award any grants to anybody who is looking for the male experience of victimization.
Yeah, they've done it as recently as just a couple of years ago in response to at least one Redditor and at least one A Voice for Men guy. They might be the same person who wrote to them specifically asking this. And this is basically where we are.
What I saw was just like something that was posted on a website where, like a clearinghouse for domestic violence grants through VAWA.
Yeah.
Right. It literally just posted a note on top saying we're not accepting grant applications studying male victimization.
No, they're not. And like, so when we hear that, that's the other thing that we constantly are told when Violence Against Women Act needs to be reformed. Well, it's already gender neutral. No, it's not. It has a gender neutrality clause that is specific to one section of the law. And it's basically one section of the law that doesn't have a whole lot of impact on any of the things that feminists wanted to avoid gender neutrality affecting, the ability to get shelter funded. Right? They don't want gender neutrality affecting that. They don't want gender neutrality affecting the research funding. They don't want gender neutrality affecting police training. It just affects one little section of the law that doesn't do much.
Right. Well, no. See, they want gender neutrality. They've just figured out which gender it is, and they've centered on that. So it's neutral. This is the gender.
It's neutral. It's like saying it's like saying that your car is green because it has one thing about it that doesn't use fossil fuels, even though it's made mostly of plastic, which is a petroleum product. And it runs on electricity that is created by burning coal. Gender neutral VAWA. But this sort of touches on some of the super chats that we got. So I'm gonna read off. We got French Honey Badger hails to us from Ancapistan, points out the idea of centrism promotes false dichotomies, like the one I was talking about. That it's somehow. Yes. It is the same to say, you know what, it's wrong. It's wrong to discriminate against men. It's the same to do that as it is to say, you know what, we should discriminate against men. Those two things are equal. False dichotomy. Then French Honey Badger also, and that was a $2 super chat. Then we have a $5 super chat, also from Incapistan. Following one's principles to their logical conclusions does not make one an extremist and does not make falling short of them a reasonable position. This is a hard one for a lot of people to deal with. Right? So we look at something really difficult, like the dynamics and scope of perpetration among pedophiles and the causes that lead up to that perpetration. Those are hard things to examine. And when you try to examine those things, you get a lot of, just take them all out and shoot them. That will solve the problem. Except it doesn't, because there is evidence that the victims that they have impacted, there's a percentage of those victims that are impacted in such a way as to lead to them becoming perpetrators later in life. There's obviously other contributing factors to that, because not all of the victims do that. But we can't look at those details and look at that information and try to figure out, well, what can we do to reduce the number of victims who are going to grow up to become perpetrators? Why do victims grow up to become perpetrators? What makes that happen anymore, right?
Yeah, because those questions have some really uncomfortable answers that
well,
just
and my question becomes, what are you going to do? You're going to take them out and shoot them too? You look into the eyes of a 5-year-old who has been traumatized and may not even understand the level and nature of his or her own trauma, and you fire that bullet, because I'm not going to.
Right. How do you even look into the face of a child and try to explain to him the I'm sorry your parents left you here, but we're here to take care of you. I cannot imagine being a child in that position and having to accept the world that my parents didn't
protect
care.
You from. Yeah.
Right.
Or just didn't know. You find out that your parents are not invincible. And the monster isn't necessarily under the bed. Your parents are not invincible, and they can't protect you from everything.
Yes, exactly.
Right? So this is one of those situations that's an ugly, difficult thing to examine, and our emotional response to it. I mean, you knee-jerk. Everybody is protective of children. If you're not protective of children, there is something wrong with you. You don't necessarily have to be parental. You don't necessarily have to have the mommy or daddy instinct. But if it doesn't bother you at all to find out that, more than it would an adult, to find out that harm is done to a child, you're either lying or you're missing something that is a normal part of the human psyche, right?
Yeah.
And so because of that, I mean, that is how we survived as a species. We take care of our young. Because of that instinct, there is a tendency to put up blinders in terms of examining the causes. It's so horrifying. It's such an awful idea that this particular thing can happen, right? And it's such an awful idea that it could potentially be a continuing cycle and so on, that it is easier for people to say, well, let's just take them all out and shoot them, and that will solve the problem, than it is to say, okay, what therapies do we need to use to support the recovery of the 5-year-old that has been impacted, so that the 5-year-old that has been impacted hasn't been psychologically changed in such a way as to prevent him or her from growing up and making normal relationships with adults, and hasn't been affected in such a way as to cause him or her to not grow up, cause him or her to develop an unnatural attraction to children. What can we do to ward that off? Because we have evidence that it happens. As soon as we start trying to examine that, we get, you support pedophilia. No. You're talking here about how to prevent pedophilia from being a cyclical problem.
Right. And it's the stigma behind the situation itself that really prevents the further investigation. And I'm sure that there are very smart minds trying to figure out the behavior of people who act this way. I just don't think that is something that we're going to hear about. But it really is unfortunate that these people are just kind of like left to the wayside.
Yeah. And of course, as soon as you try to start examining tougher issues like that, examining that particular issue, or examining the issue of sexual violence, examining the issue of intimate partner violence, examining issues of divorce and the effects of father involvement versus father absence, all of these things.
When you actually bring up that men are 60% more likely to become rapists if they grow up with a single mother, people just say, so you're blaming women for rape.
Right. The thought terminating switch flips instantly. They will start accusing you of misogyny. They will accuse you of, like Black Knight Fool says in the chat, normalizing pedophilia, as if. And let me emphasize here, what I have described is examining how this dysfunction is caused and seeking ways to prevent it, and you get accused of normalizing it. By seeking ways to prevent something, you're normalizing. How do we stop this from happening? Well, how dare you? You're normalizing it. That is sort of the and of course the idea of, let's just take them all out and shoot them. Not extreme, right? Not extreme to talk about the mass murder of a group of people as a solution to a problem that's hard to examine, even when it doesn't necessarily prevent the problem from continuing to happen in the next generation and the next and next. But actually examining means of prevention, that's extremism.
Yeah, you can't promote a solution to the problem because once you describe the problem, then your solution has to then include, well, why are we here? It must be the fault of these people who have these problems, but no,
Well, there's a degree to which it is the fault of the people who have that problem. Let me go on. I have dietary impulses, right? I want to eat junk food all the time, and if I do that, I'm going to get fat and I'm going to get sick. So there are consequences to that action. Those consequences are to me mostly, obviously if I screw that up and I die young because I gave myself a heart attack, that's going to hurt my family. But those, I'm in control of whether or not I engage in the behaviors those impulses, are for. And it is the same thing of every person has attractions, has sexual attractions. And there are plenty of people in the world who are attractive, right? If you sleep with every single one of them that is available to you to sleep with, and that you can, that you can get into their pants or whatever, there are consequences to that too. So every person in the world has a degree to which they control their sexual impulses. So I am not for a moment absolving pedophiles of responsibility for acting on their impulses. That when they do that, they are 100% responsible. It's their fault. It is their fault when they act on their impulses, and the damage they do to the children they harm is their fault. That is not to say that having those impulses is their fault. But acting on them, absolutely 100%.
When you actually bring up things like, 60 to 80%, like a majority of men in prison for raping women were sexually abused by women
As
in
kids,
their childhood or adolescence. When you bring those things up, what you get accused of is making excuses, right? You're making excuses. You're not trying to find out what is causing it so that you can maybe avoid it. I would love to be able to motivate society to deal with female sexual abusers, right?
Well, okay, so I think this is a good place to interject, right?
The best way to do that, in our society currently, is to say, well, if you don't do something about female sexual abusers and they continue to abuse boys, right, then those boys are actually more likely to grow up and violate women, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay, so let's look at R. Kelly, all right? This is a major thing in the media right now. And he was abused by female members of his family, and now he has perpetuated his abuse to other people potentially. I allegedly, I don't know, but but to say that he is completely to blame for the things that he's done. And yes, of course, I can't kill someone and then say, well, it was the patriarchy that made me do it and get away with it. It's not a viable defense. But if you have a history of trauma in your life, a sexual abuse in your history, there's no way that any person who studies the
it causes dysfunction in everybody. It hits different people different ways. Like in me, I went through a period of serious inability to set and enforce my boundaries, and that leads to what we learned in our Title IX show is polyvictimization. And I had to, as an adult, go through and learn everything that you normally learned growing up about, how to identify, establish, set, enforce, communicate your boundaries, all that. And then I also had to go through and learn ways to be mindful of my particular vulnerabilities and my safety. And so that's one way that it can happen. Where some people go the predatory route, I went the other way. I became this so-called polyvictim until I started actually mitigating the damage myself. And the hard part is going to therapy doesn't always work because therapists don't necessarily address the real situation that you are in. So, for instance, if you're female and you were victimized by another female, they don't want to deal with that. They want to find a way to make it patriarchal, and there is no patriarchy in a girl raping another girl. So you have that going on, but
okay,
so there is a change in your psychological state that takes place. I just wanted to point that out.
I want to point out too that Thornhill and Palmer went through a huge public slander campaign, right? They were the targets of a massive smear campaign against them because they dared to publish a book called A Natural History of Rape, Biological Bases of Sexual Coercion, right? And they studied sexual coercion from a biological evolutionary standpoint, right? And they identified a number of predictors, right? Not all of which were environmental. Some of them were biological. If your dad was a rapist, even if he was never part of your life, right, you might end up being a rapist, right? Because some of that is heritable, right? It's heritable to some degree. So you're not guaranteed to be a rapist like dad, right? But you may be more predisposed to sexual coercion than the general population. Okay, so they looked at it and they looked at every single aspect of sexual coercion, including impact on victims, including the fact that when you have prepubescent victims and you have postmenopausal victims, female victims, right, they report less trauma from being violated than women in their prime, 16 to 26 years old, right? There is a biological basis to women's sexual caution, right? And to feelings of being violated when they feel like they've made a mistake, right?
Right.
Or, yeah. Okay, so all of these things, and their purpose, their stated purpose in the foreword of their book was, we want to identify all of the different markers, right? In terms of, kids' behavior, kids' attitudes, how they behave, all of these things, right? Their social attitudes, their social viability, right? Cognitive abilities, right? All of those things. We want to be able to identify them so that we can target children for specific forms of intervention that would prevent this, right? Prevent kids who are predisposed by these numerous factors, right, to becoming rapists as adults. We would like to intervene, right? So kind of like, I guess, in the case of like the show Dexter, right? Or whatever it was, the serial killer, right? Dexter, the serial killer. The dad is like, okay, well, you're probably going to become a sociopath. Here, let me intervene in such a way that you don't harm innocent people who,
Please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Please. Oh, sorry.
Oh my God, dog! Shut up. Anyway, so essentially, they're looking at it. They're taking a diagnostic and preventive approach to this, but they were accused of making excuses. They were accused of making excuses for rapists, of justifying rape, of saying rape is a biological inevitability, and therefore we may as well do nothing about it. And that was it was entirely different from their thesis, which was, even if it has biological causes, there are things we can do about it.
Yeah. Imagine translating that response over to cancer prevention, medical cancer prevention. So we find out, for instance, my family has a gene that makes it much more likely, like I will develop 100% likelihood of cancer if I smoke. So we find out I have a genetic predisposition toward cancer. Well, obviously I might as well just give up and I'm going to get cancer, right? Don't take any precautions against it because it's inevitable. That's not what I was told, right? That's not what my family was told. It's not what the doctor said. It's not what science has told us. But the emotional response, we're doomed. We're doomed. We're going to die, because you don't die anyway, right? We're going to die that way. That's how we're going to die. Oh, we just found out. We're going to die that way.
Well, but here's
that would be the stupidest response we could have when there's clear evidence that there are things that we are vulnerable to that we can, avoid.
Yeah, but the stupid thing about cancer is that you literally will die of cancer. If you don't die of something else first,
yeah, eventually you will
die of cancer. It might happen at 150, it might happen at 185, right? But you will die of cancer. Your body will eventually make a mistake replicating a cell and have that happen, right? That's just the way it is, right? And yeah, okay, so we can reduce rape. We can reduce it exponentially. We can continue to reduce it and reduce it and reduce it. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's ever going to completely go away, right? This is the thing. We can reduce motor vehicle deaths, but we're not going to be able to ever make it so that nobody ever dies in a car accident. We can reduce drownings of children in swimming pools, or accidental shootings of children, by them getting their parents' guns and playing with them, right? But we're never going to get all of those risks down to zero. We're never going to everything down to zero.
No.
But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to understand what causes the problem. And if what causes the problem is part biological predisposition in some individuals and also part environmental, right? I would really like to be able to know how we deal with the children who are the products of a man who raped a woman, right? Maybe there's some parenting advice that could be given.
Right. If there is nature plus nurture equals adult, and we know that nature has provided a handicap, then we need to examine what can be done with nurture. The same way we would examine what could be done with nurture for an asthmatic child, or a child who has developed cerebral palsy in utero, or a child who is born with one leg shorter than the other, all of which I've encountered in my life. You know, and there's always, even if nature gives you a raw deal, there are always aspects of nurture that you can use to mitigate the impact that raw deal has on your life. And that's, like, humanity has been really good at mitigating the impact that nature's raw deals have on people's lives. It's why people like me didn't die in childhood during the 20th century like people like me would have. Like, I never would have survived in the 18th century or the 19th century. I'd have been dead meat the first time I had an asthma attack.
Developmental disabilities don't necessarily necessitate that person is not viable for, you know, the best of outcomes. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I actually had a teammate on my track team that had cerebral palsy who engaged. He didn't do things like running the hurdles, but he did the field events. And he did the field events to such a decent degree that he was average in his capabilities, despite having well below average a coordination balance. And, you know, he had strength, average strength. But he was able to participate and be part of the team. And he was actually able to compete with some people, and he actually beat some people. So, like, there's quite a bit that we can do to mitigate nature, and so looking at nature isn't necessarily the permission for dysfunction that people try to give it.
Right.
And imagine, like, again, translate this over to something else. So you find out through a sinkhole developing in the street outside your house, like just a big ass section of it, enough for a big truck to fall into, just collapses and drops, and now you have this great big hole in the street. Nobody can drive by your house. And so they do an assessment to find out, you know, why did this happen? Well, that's the first thing we're not allowed to do in terms of issues of intimate partner sexual violence, in terms of how outcomes are affected by parental involvement and so on, right? So you do this examination. We find out the street collapsed because the land underneath it, the combination of the utilities, the structures for utilities that were under the street, plus runoff from a farm that was on the edge of town, that managed to find its way under that street and create essentially a current under that street. That combination destabilized created a loss of dirt and destabilized the street, and that's why the street fell. So we find that out, and the first thing that the person who finds that out is hit with is, well, clearly you just support sinkholes.
Oh, and clearly you don't support utilities.
And you hate farmers.
Yeah.
You hate farmers.
Oh, yeah.
You know, talking about, retiling the farmer's land, obviously that you're just blaming all farmers for all sinkholes. That would be an idiotic approach.
Not just all farmers. You're also blaming the utility companies for running their there. And so basically what you're saying is not only should there be no farmers, but people shouldn't have lights and electricity and heating and running water.
Yep, and how dare we consider the possibility of changing the way the farmer's land is tiled to direct the water in a different direction, without doing damage to the farmer's ability to grow their crop or anything. That's like clearly an attack on farmers.
Oh yeah,
it's the farmer you hate farmers, and how dare we suggest taking measures to shore up the street before we put another layer of pavement over that space so that this won't happen again, because clearly you're calling streets everywhere defective. There's something that you just support sinkholes. You're a sinkhole apologist. Yep, you're anti-street. You're a sinkhole apologist, sinkhole lover. Shame on you. How is that? Is that going to solve the problem?
Oh God, it's so fucking ridiculous. And honestly, I think that 90% of the problem with this topic is the over-the-top rhetoric that feminists have been promoting, since before the second wave, but certainly it got really, really intense during the second wave, right? About rape as some kind of concerted campaign to, on the part of all men to keep women in a state of subjugation and oppression, right? So essentially, you had people like Brown Miller, people like Dworkin, people like McKinnon, people like Sheila Jeffries, right? You had all of them saying that essentially marriage as an institution evolved from rape as a practice. That was Dworkin. You have them saying things like, given the relative positions of men and women politically in society, women do not have the collective power to give consent to heterosexual sex. So all heterosexual sex is rape. That was, I believe, McKinnon. You had Sheila Jeffries come out and say that heterosexual sex is not natural. Heterosexuality is not natural, and heterosexual sex is not a natural act. So literally the act of procreation, literally the act that's engaged in, regardless of what other acts are engaged in, right? But the only act that is engaged in by every single species that reproduces, that has a male and female sex and reproduces sexually, right? This act is not natural. The act that creates progeny is not natural. It is an unnatural act, right? So you had all of this, and then you had, you literally had, Jamie Kilstein, right? He's a somewhat reformed male vegan feminist, who was on Joe Rogan, who essentially said rape is worse than death. And Joe Rogan is like, what the fuck? Right? And Jamie's like, well, yeah, because if you're raped, right, you have to live with that, right? But if you're murdered, you don't.
Oh.
And I'm like, what the fuck? So rape is worse than murder because, isn't that just saying to every woman who's been sexually violated, right, and every man who's been sexually violated, you might as well just kill yourself because there's no getting over it, there's no getting past it. There's no moving forward with your life. There's no ever feeling safe again.
Right.
Right. You are going to have to live in that moment.
That makes me want to pull my hair out.
Time for the rest of your life. Right. And it is going to be worse than the sweet kiss of death. Right.
Yeah. That makes me want to pull my hair out.
And I'm blown away. Right. Like, literally, we have Asia Argento and Rose McGowan saying, "Oh, he gave me oral sex in exchange for a part in a movie, and now 20 years later, I've decided that was rape."
Yeah, but
I'm sorry, but this rhetoric, this bloated, inflated, highly charged rhetoric around sexual violation of women, this needs to fucking go. It needs to go.
The difference between the position you usually see with anti-feminists versus the position you see with feminists on this, all right, is with anti-feminists, we see having the chance at recovery taken away as worse. And the feminists don't actually expect recovery to happen. They don't believe in recovery. So since they don't believe in recovery, which like that's actually, that would be terrifying, right? To not believe in recovery. But they don't believe in recovery. Their lack of belief in recovery means having to live with some level of trauma for the rest of your life, that like basically you're a broken record. Recovery, to be honest, the two most upsetting things that have ever happened to me in my life, I have been to the point of dying where they have to inject you in the chest with a chemical to bring you back. So I've had that. I've been in a coma. I have been sexually assaulted more than once, by more than one individual. I've been robbed. I've been beaten. I've had plenty of experiences. You could turn around and say all of these things could be traumatic, right? None of them touch two experiences that I've had. One at 10 years old, the other as an adult. At 10 years old, I watched my mother almost die in a car accident that I was in. I was in the back seat, she was in the front. That was more traumatic than anything I experienced in my life, even brain swelling, up until the moment during my C-section when I mistook the doctor's "this is our last chance" to mean not what he meant by it, which was this is our last chance to do this without having to make a second cut. I mistook it to mean this is our last chance to get the baby out alive. There isn't anything I've ever experienced in my life that has been more traumatic than hearing that sentence. And there probably never will be. I hope there never will be. Because I thought I was going to lose my baby. And, there isn't anything that touches that, okay? And I don't care if I get called a rape apologist for saying that. Screw any feminist, any one of them, any person that comes along and tells me I have to be more traumatized about something that happened to me 30 years ago was over when it was over. And something that happened to me 40 years ago, for fuck's sake, that's over when it's over, and that I could recover from, and that it wasn't a permanent thing in my life. It wasn't a permanent loss in my life. Than I would feel if I had lost someone who I loved and needed in my life and cared about and was responsible for, or who was responsible for me.
I have to agree, and there was that one journalist that I did an interview with, and she, I said that we need to tone down the rhetoric on sexual assault, right? We need to stop seeing it as the worst thing that could ever happen to anyone, right? And she says, well, I can't imagine anything worse. And I said, okay, so imagine that you're asleep in your bed, and then you wake up and there's a man in your room, and he has your 3-year-old daughter, because I knew she had a 3-year-old daughter, in his hands, and he has a gun to her head, and he says, have sex with me or I'm going to kill her. What would you do? And it was like pulling teeth to get her, like she paused for a good 15 seconds and then said, well, I'd still be trying to figure out a way for us to get out of that situation. And I said, but you'd do it. If there wasn't a way for you to get out of the situation, you would do it, wouldn't you? Right? Rather than see your kid's brains splattered against a wall, you'd do it. Right? And she said, I see what you mean. And that, I was blown away by how difficult it was to wrestle that admission out of her, that she would submit to 20 minutes of sex that she didn't want with a man that she didn't know and didn't consent to have sex with, rather than see her child killed. Like, I'm literally thinking to myself, okay, so in what reality is a woman, right, going to be like kneeling on the floor, cradling her baby's head, her dead 3-year-old's head in her lap, trying to scoop blood and brains and bone matter back into it, into the exit hole of the bullet, right? Weeping, but comforted only by the realization that at least I wasn't raped. Yeah. At least I didn't have sex when I didn't want to.
That this idea that it has to be your greatest trauma, and that's the other thing. This is one of the things that really bugs me about the feminist approach to discussion of crime and trauma and ethics and morals and legality and all that. There's no reason at all why the issues of rape or domestic violence had to be exaggerated in order to argue that these are problems in society that needed to be addressed, right? And it's the rarity, the idea of rarity does not make an excuse for a crime.
Shoplifting's a lot more common than murder, I'll tell you that.
Well, yeah.
So I don't understand why we're paying any attention to murder.
Well, think about it the other way, in the other direction, all right? Serial killers are the rarest, right, of all killers. Accidental killers are much, much more common than serial killers. So should we just not punish people if they are serial killers because it's not a real problem? There's not that many of them. Cannibals.
I know.
Cannibals are even more rare. So should we just, people who kill to cannibalize other people, or cannibal killers, I should say, people who are cannibal killers, well, should we just not punish them because they're such a rarity that they're not a problem in society? Should we
but
not?
Long pig is so tasty,
right,
Hannah.
Now, so what's tasty, like what's feminism doing there? What's their real issues? They're not advocating for a direct address to the problems involved in intimate partner and sexual violence. What they're wanting to do when they talk about domestic and sexual violence against women, right? And when they're inflating those statistics is they are trying to describe it as on a spectrum of normative masculine behavior. That is what they're trying to do. That is why they inflate those statistics. It is not necessarily it's more than
to present women as victims of the crime of crimes, the holiest of holies, right? The thing of things that will destroy any woman and make her want to throw herself off of a cliff, right? It's not necessarily that. That adds to the impetus, the motivation on society to deal with these problems. But what they're trying to do when they inflate the problems, when they expand the definition of sexual violence, when they expand the definition of domestic violence to include things like refusing her sex, right? Refusing sex or affection to her, right? Or not allowing her to gamble away your entire bank account, right? Not allowing her access to your money, right? Those things that are considered domestic violence now. Right. And the sexual violence that, you got your bum grabbed in a nightclub. And so now that's a serious problem and you should have reported it to the police. Right. The whole reasoning behind that is they want to maintain the narrative that violence against women is a form of normative masculinity that keeps women oppressed. Right. It is part of that concerted campaign that Catherine McKinnon was talking about.
Right, but that campaign exists for another reason, that's underlying reason below that, right? There's a whole spectrum of professions and fundraising and political lobbying and so on that relies on that narrative. That is the real reason. It's because if you are going to advocate for infringements of due process, government funding, the creation of jobs to deal with an issue, the creation of entire areas of academic study to promote understanding and awareness of an issue, you have to make it a bigger issue. If it's just a problem in society like armed robbery, if it's just a problem in society like shoplifting, if it's just a problem in society like drunk driving, you don't necessarily have the same level of need for such a broad spectrum of government intervention and government. Well, drunk driving has actually been used to advocate for unnecessary and somewhat incorrect intervention into people's lives. And I say that as a person who has been in a drunk driving accident. That traumatic moment I was talking about, the driver that hit us was drunk. But the driver that hit us wasn't going to, that drunkenness, that wasn't going to be prevented by, say,
he wasn't at 0.08.
No, that wasn't going to be
0.25.
Well, he was so drunk that you could smell it when he walked up to the car, and he was slurring his words, and he wasn't walking straight. So, in any case, the thing is, it's not going to be helped by. He wasn't going to be stopped by a checkpoint. He wasn't going to be stopped by a lot of the interventions that have been justified by that. He would have been stopped by education. But not necessarily the education that he had access to. I mean, there were DARE programs and all that stuff going on. But in any case, so back to the whole issue of the feminist exaggeration of these issues, and they're doing it for the purpose of advocating for changes in law and policy that are going to infringe on people's due process rights, that are going to direct taxes that are paid by men into women's organizations and stuff like that, that are going to create entire areas of study that are going to influence things like the field of psychology and the field of research, peer review, and everything that gets touched by feminism. The idea of actually starting to dismantle all of that, what we're up against, when I talk about pathological centrism, what we're up against is every time we start to look at that, every time we start to look at, hey, the process by which this entire system was created is predicated on this flaw right here. This flaw where this woman, Mary Cost, came along and said, well, if we just ignore people's own assessment of their experiences and the fact that that consent is more complex than feminists make it, and that refusal is an aspect of sexual violence, not necessarily consent. If we just ignore that, and we just ignore what is normal human interaction, and we decide to automatically label male sexual contact predatory by nature. If we just do those things, we're gonna fix everything. We're gonna get the statistics we want. We can have the influence we want. When you go back and you start looking at that, when you go back and you start looking at the fact that she turned the definition into an opportunity to marginalize male victims, you get people that come along and say, what is the difference between what you're doing, playing victim of Mary Coss, and what Coss did in the first place? We have to be able, as a movement, to say, the difference is Coss was wrong. The difference is it is wrong to lie about the dynamics of an area of crime in order to create a false network of academic study and, or rather academic propaganda, and financial support and legal stipulations and so on. It is not wrong to examine those wrongdoings and seek to right or remedy the mistakes. It is wrong to hit someone. It is not wrong to throw your arm up in front of that fist and stop it from impacting your nose. And we have to be able to fight back. And we have to be able to advocate fighting back. And we have to be able to articulate it is not wrong to undo a mistake. It isn't wrong to correct an error.
You're absolutely right, and you can only be silent in the presence of such uh you know
In the presence of such stupidity, you're allowed to call them stupid for acting like that.
I mean, God, it's just I'm done. I'm done.
That's all right. We're past the 2-hour mark anyway. So, in fact, we've got a 2.5-hour sausage, I think, now, because we started at 7 and it's 9:26. So I better finish off the super chats. Basically, my rant. That's my take on it. We have to be able to tell people, no, it's not the same. And it's not honest for you to call it the same. It's not honest for you to call self-defense the same as an assault, and it's not honest for you to demand that we moderate our position because it's too dramatically different from another position. Look at the actual natures of the positions. Stop being a coward. So. Our super chats, we have Apollo the Leader gave us $5 and said, just showing a little support. Keep up the great work, Badgers. Thank you, Apollo. The mighty Mighty Balzac gave us $5 Australian and said, it allows empathetic lefties to hate without consequences. Maybe those ists and obes are onto something. This is really bad because it's been long enough that I'm not sure. I think he's talking about the act of seeking the middle ground as a shield against examining the nuance between two positions. And it allows everybody to hate without consequences. You turn around and see any outlook. Like, it doesn't matter whether you support or not, whether you support the current spectrum of not gay rights, but gay rights issues or stated gay rights issues, the LGBT positions on gay rights issues, right? It doesn't matter whether you support that or not. It's not necessarily anti-gay to examine the nuances of positions that oppose those positions for logic and reason. And it's quite possible that you might find there are reasonable things being said, like the trans bathroom issue. My position on that is the government shouldn't be involved either way. There shouldn't be some enforcer out there going, you can't go into that bathroom, and there shouldn't be an enforcer out there going, you have to let this person into that bathroom. So if mom and pop shop down the street says we have one bathroom and it's unisex, that's their business, that's their choice. If they have a men's room and a women's room and they want to say who they count as men and who they count as women, then you can decide whether you approve or disapprove and you want to do business with that company. And that the cops, there shouldn't be a bathroom police either way. What bothers me is when we have women on both sides of this discussion, right, accusing men of being violent and dangerous in support of their arguments. So you have the argument that trans women are going to go into the bathroom just to rape all the women in there. And then you have the argument that if trans women are forced to go into the men's room, all the men in there are going to beat them up. Which, to be honest, if they're going to get beat up by men, it's more likely to happen if they're going to the women's room. And it's because women are playing victim of them being in there. The reality is, in a situation like that, it's going to have to be on a case-by-case, location-by-location, environment-by-environment basis. And it's been overcomplicated, and it's been become something that you can't talk about. And the idea of looking at both sides of the discussion and actually examining the nuances of the discussion has just fallen by the wayside. And there's no centrist position you can take on that discussion without being an idiot. But you can take parts from both sides of that discussion and come up with a reasonable approach so that at the end of the day, we're not preventing trans women from being able to go to the bathroom. And we're not preventing women who are not trans from being able to go to the bathroom. Because that's really what bathrooms are all about.
How about we just let everybody fucking piss on trees, and that way, you don't have to worry about where you're pissing.
Well, because the acid would damage the trees in the long run. But yeah, so a lot of this ends up being an excuse to hate on somebody, and I've seen people hating on the left, I've been seeing people hating on the right, seen people hating on trans women, and I've seen people hating on cis women in that discussion. It's really unnecessary.
Agreed. Honestly, I think trying to stick up for the dignity of all human beings, I don't agree with a lot of what trans activists are pushing to these days, right? Like, I just was on a half-hour radio show with essentially a fundamentalist or an evangelical Christian radio show, right? Talking about the new guidance in Canada on trans children, the new medical guidance, which I completely disagree with. I don't disagree with it on religious grounds. I don't disagree with it on the grounds that trans people don't exist, or that, it's a mental illness or whatever. I disagree with it on a number of grounds that are supported by the literature at the moment. And on the basis that I would not allow my 13-year-old to decide what time his curfew should be. So why should I allow him to make a permanent, life-changing, irreversible decision to engage in cross-hormone therapy, not just puberty blockers, but cross-hormone therapy and transition, before he is old enough to vote, old enough to give his life for his country, old enough to drink alcohol legally, to smoke a joint in our beautiful Canada, where now cannabis is legal. If we are willing to say children of a certain age are not capable of making the decision to smoke a joint or
get
drink
a tattoo.
A beer, or get a tattoo, or get their ears pierced, because I think it's still 14.
Yep.
Before you no longer need your parents' permission, right? If we're not prepared to do that, but we're prepared to say, okay, well, we're not just going to put you on puberty blockers, we're going to put you on cross-gender hormones and begin your transition. And so if you're a girl, your voice will be permanently deepened. You will have a permanent Adam's apple. Your shoulders will broaden. Your frame will end up being a man's frame. And we really have no idea whether you're going to be happy with this decision in 10 years.
But you will have a damaged heart. Your heart gets damaged if you're female and you take testosterone, there is damage that it can do to your heart. That is something that I learned.
Yeah, same thing with estrogen for men, for males, and when you actually look at what's going on here and the permanency of these decisions, right? And the reasons why the reason that the Canadian medical the people who wrote the new guidance, right, for family doctors. The reason that they gave to start giving transgender hormones before age 16, right, cross-gender hormones, not just puberty blockers, was because people would feel socially isolated if they weren't going through puberty at the same time as the rest of their peers, right? And so it's no longer the whole, puberty blockers buy you some time to make up your mind and be really sure, right? Now it's you do the puberty blockers and then you try to, transition the kid at the actual onset of when they would be going through puberty. And I'm just like blown away. How the fuck did we get here? And how is that seen as the mainstream view of the medical establishment. That is the centrist position, apparently. And my position that I wouldn't let my fucking kid decide what he wants to eat for dinner at that age.
Yeah, somehow that's extreme. And that's again, that goes back to Ann Capistan's false dichotomy point where here we are, all that we have to do is use labels, and we can make anything moderate and declare anything extremist.
Well, listen, if kids did what you told them to do, then we could just fucking eliminate this whole thing.
Yeah.
In one.
Well, if gender was just a social construct, then you could just socially construct your kid out of their transism.
Yep. I still want to see somebody draw a cartoon of the social construct concept as a mech warrior attacking the city. Whatever city, it doesn't matter. The city of Genderville is being attacked by a social construct and just decimated, but it's all in their heads. So we have, let's see, Blave Kaiser gave us $10 and said, you can only push people so far. Even centrist Tim Pool said that New York and Virginia's new abortion law is evil, but some conservatives fought against by saying, you killing girls because fuck boys. So I'm not sure, some of that was unclear, but, I just, as far as abortion laws and everything are concerned, one of the points that I have seen made about this is the general public in the United States, the limits to their support for protections, legal protections for the abortion industry, as opposed to like their opposition to laws against the exercise of the abortion industry. Actual legal protections for the abortion, that extends to about the first trimester. And then people are like, no, beyond that, women should have made up their minds and done it by then. Then you have a much smaller percentage of the population that supports second term as a choice, just a birth control choice. It's extremely rare for anybody to support third-term abortions. And there's a reason for it. I mean, by that time, there is no denying that what you are killing is a baby. Like, you can rationalize, and people do. I've seen them do it a lot, actually. Most of the arguments I get from people when I make anti-industry arguments, because I'm not necessarily pro legal solutions to what I consider to be the abortion problem. But when I get arguments from people that are pro-abortion arguments, they're almost always rationalizations of, well, it's okay to kill this living human organism because it doesn't have XYZ, because it doesn't do XYZ, because it has XYZ characteristics. None of them are able to fully rationalize away the fact that it is a living human organism and it is a developing baby. They just, are like, well, at this stage of development, I'm okay with killing it. But as you get into greater and further stages of development, people have a lot more difficulty rationalizing being okay with killing it. So that's one point as to why it's not necessarily a centrist position to accept the murder, of a unborn infant that is, a month before birth, as opposed to 8 months before birth. And the other end of it is they admitted the Virginia law. God, I can't think of the governor of Virginia actually admitted in a discussion that has been blasted all over conservative media that this can entail an infant being injected in utero, then the birth happens, then the infant is resuscitated, and as he put it, a discussion happens with the parents, meaning they decide whether or not to kill it again, and to kill their baby boy or their baby girl again. And this is in reference to babies that are born with severe handicaps, right? Babies that are born, they use the term deformed, which used to be very politically incorrect because you don't want to call people that have been born with handicaps deformed. Nobody will tolerate that. And all of my life, throughout my experience in anti-abortion activism, I've always been told by abortion advocates that this is a women's health and safety issue, right? That the reason we need to have this procedure protected under the laws of our country is so that women don't die in childbirth. So I want to know one thing from anybody that can answer me this question. After the baby has been born, when it's not in the uterus, there's no part of it that's attached to the mother, it can be, the child can be adopted out to loving parents. There is nothing connecting the child to the mother except genetics. What specific threat does this child pose to the health of the mother's body?
None whatsoever.
Can anybody answer me that? Can anybody tell me a specific threat?
They can't. But what? Okay, here's the specific threat, and this was posited in that paper that was published a couple of years ago by two researchers in the British Journal of Medical Ethics, right? Where they were recommending post-birth abortions, after-birth abortions, up to age 2, right? And their argument was that if you are walking down the street with a lottery ticket in your pocket, and unbeknownst to you, it's a winning ticket, and it falls out of your pocket, and you never knew that the ticket was the winning ticket, you haven't lost anything, right? Because you are unaware of your loss, right? And so until children develop a concept of future, of what tomorrow is, or later is, right? And develop the level of cognition to value their own continued existence and to feel the loss when that existence is threatened, okay? Or feel the threat of loss when that existence is threatened, right? Then if you kill them, they have not been harmed. They have not been harmed, right? This was the argument, the ethical argument made by these two people who somehow found it very weird that they suddenly started getting death threats. Anyway, and that they argued further that the emotional impact on the mother of knowing that her child was out there, right, as an adopted child, would be more negative. It would have more of an impact, a negative impact on her than it would have on a child who had no concept of tomorrow to kill that child. And so the mother should be allowed to make the decision to kill that child up to that stage of cognitive development.
What I want to know is whether they have considered
that child is child is not a person.
What I want to know is have they considered how it sounds when these type of advocates argue as though the knowledge that her baby is out there in the world, adopted, being raised by other people, would be more traumatic for the mother and more hurtful and painful for the mother than the knowledge that her child is dead.
Mm-hmm.
Right? What are they saying about women?
Yeah.
You know, that's
I'm just blown fucking away.
Right.
I'm blown away by the fact that you can actually say to somebody, okay, what if we got to the point where we had like transporter technology, right? Like in Star Trek, right? And so if you needed an abortion, the procedure, the least invasive procedure would be to transport the fetus out of your uterus onto a table. Okay? That completely eliminates the bodily autonomy argument there. Okay, and what if we also had artificial wombs, and there was a father, a biological father, whose genetic material was, half of that fetus's genetic material, and he said, well, her issue is her bodily autonomy. That is the issue on which her right to get this fetus out of her uterus is based, right? But I own half that fetus. I'm willing to take responsibility for it. I'm willing to pay for an artificial uterus. Can you please beam that fetus into the artificial uterus? Right? And I have actually had really intelligent people be completely unable to answer the question, do you think it would be okay for him to then come after her for child support?
Hell, just the idea of allowing the child to survive in that situation. I've had arguments with female abortion advocates, mainly female abortion advocates that have claimed that it would be a violation of the woman's bodily autonomy if that baby survived outside of her body after being removed from her body without her consent. And I actually had one person has actually argued to me in seriousness that the mother's DNA makes the child part of her body, even if the child is not contained inside of her body. But the father's DNA doesn't make the child part of his body, because the child starts out contained inside of her body. So there's a lot of irrational...
Oh my God, what the fuck?
No, that was people will twist themselves in knots, and nobody ever addresses my position. People always address the position of, you want to outlaw the procedure. No, I want to convince young women that there are far better alternatives. Far better.
Abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. Right? When did we forget that third word?
Here's my take on it is, it's never safe. I don't think it should be illegal, because I don't think that that's going to prevent it from happening. Legality did not make it safer. If you look at the range of abortion deaths, the drop in abortion deaths, there's not like this dramatic cliff where in 1972 in the United States, all of a sudden it went from massive numbers of women dying from abortions to almost none. It was a slow decline as medical technology caught up with the demand, which is much higher than it should be. Especially in a world where we have like 11 different categories of birth control, and we have control over no. In general, in terms of consent, right? So, as far as my take on this, this issue, my position is, I would love to see young women grow up realizing their control over their fertility, their capability of earning enough money to buy their own birth control, their ability to use that birth control, their ability to decide who and when and how and what level of risk and all of that, and their ability to make other choices besides surgical abortion if they happen to still, with all of those other choices, screw up and get pregnant. The idea that it should be a last resort, I would think most abortion advocates, if they are really genuinely pro-choice, it shouldn't bother them that women might mostly make other choices and only use an invasive surgical procedure as a last resort. And it is an invasive surgical procedure, right? With risks.
Hannah, women! If you need an abortion, get one!
Yeah, and that seems to be the response too. Like there's all of a sudden you hit this wall of, oh my God, you just castigated all women for taking responsibility for themselves and their safety and their actions, the consequences of their actions, and so on.
How did we get to the point where shout your abortion, hashtag shout your abortion is the thing? where Lena Dunham can write, I just wish I'd had an abortion because then I could relate to the female experience and on an even deeper level, right?
Like yeah, killing
how
your
did we
baby
get
is
here?
the female experience now. God,
I know.
and-
It's like, what the fuck?
Like, and and I would not advocate, for instance, turning around and like you find out a woman has had an abortion, going, damn you, you evil woman, shame, you should go to hell because you had an. No, that's not really productive at all. But if you find out your teenager is considering becoming sexually active, yeah, you want to take every measure you possibly can to prevent your teen from getting to the point where the decision is, do I have an abortion or don't I have an abortion now that I am pregnant? Okay.
Oh, you know what's even worse?
The goal would be to prevent getting into that situation in the first place.
You know what's even worse with that? Because it seems like every single topic that social justice touches turns into some kind of thing where like 12-year-olds have the capacity to make lifelong, life-altering, irreversible decisions without any parental intervention or consent or
advice even from the parents. Yeah. And
because,
that's the other thing. If your 12-year-old is pregnant, there's a really serious problem.
I had a friend, not the close friend, but an acquaintance that I was friendly with, right? Back when I was living in British Columbia, and she was so upset one day because she said her 13-year-old daughter had asked her for a ride down island so that she could have an abortion. And she was even more upset because the only reason she was informed that her daughter had been pregnant and had an abortion was because her daughter had asked her for a ride.
Yeah.
And that the doctor was not only not obligated to let her know that her 13-year-old daughter was pregnant, but that her daughter was forbidden by law from letting her know that.
Now,
right? That
as far as
somehow when you're 14 years old and you want to go to the doctor and you need some kind of, I don't know, painkiller or autoimmune drug or whatever, right? You need parental consent. I literally was called in to, I dropped my kid off 15 years old at the doctor to get antibiotics for a freaking chest infection, right? And they called me and said, we need you to come in to give consent for the examination and everything else, right? Okay, because he's only 15.
But you
right?
you are not allowed to be involved if he was a girl and he was going to have an abortion. And
if he was a girl, he was pregnant, and he wanted an abortion, I would not be allowed to know that he was sexually active. I would not be allowed to know that he had been pregnant, and I would not be allowed to know that he had had an abortion.
But was it the daughter forbidden by law or the doctor?
Doctor.
Okay, wanted to clarify. So in Ohio, we have a parental consent law. And I used to be an absolute advocate of parental consent laws, carte blanche. Well, that changed when one of my friends was forced by her mother and a doctor, Dr. Gosnell style almost. The doctor threatened to physically assault this girl by grabbing her and restraining her and drugging her if she didn't consent to have the abortion. And her baby was aborted against her will. I know someone who has experienced a forced abortion because she was a minor and that's what her mother wanted. And this is, it's a hard thing to say, but parental consent laws are not a solution in and of themselves. And they really should, if they're going to exist, they really should contain the stipulation that this procedure cannot be forced on any minor whose life is not threatened by complications of the pregnancy. Period.
Oh no, I wouldn't even be in favor of parental consent laws. I'd be in favor of parental informing laws.
Yeah.
Right? That the parents have a right to know what's going on with their kid. Maybe not a right to make the decision or force the decision on their kid, but the right to know what's going on with their kid.
Yeah, well, for instance, your daughter is going to go have an abortion, and the doctor doesn't know. Well, she's not a hemophiliac technically, but she is a bleeder, and that maybe the kid doesn't understand the seriousness of that and doesn't think it's important to tell the doctor. Yeah, it is. Or the kid doesn't know because you've never had to address it with them that they have allergies to certain medications, or that how serious their allergies are to certain medications. You have access to the child's medical history through their doctor. Does the abortionist have that access? This is a medical procedure that is invasive. A lot of times feminists try to minimize that. Because they want to treat it like the removal of a hangnail. No, it's not. It's not a simple procedure.
Okay, well, here's the thing, though. Feminists
surgery.
Say a transvaginal ultrasound is invasive.
Yeah,
and
but
like
then the abortion that follows it up isn't, right? So, this is like one of those issues. You can't discuss this issue rationally. Period. You can't discuss this issue and you can't discuss this issue from a standpoint other than the two poles. And if you do, you can't discuss this issue from a standpoint that doesn't treat taking a position on it at all as insanity. So the centrist position on this, like the faux centrist position on this, is everybody's wrong about the abortion issue, and obviously the normal position on it is, my side is right and everybody else is wrong. And on the poles of that are, it's evil and there's nothing complicated or incorrect about doing it ever for any reason in any way with any level of consequences. And there are no consequences. You're not allowed to talk about the consequences. So that's basically, and that thought terminating behavior basically prevents the actual industry from being anything like proponents of the procedure tell people they want the industry to be like. And it also prevents any kind of addressing the issue by opponents of the procedure, for the most part. Because usually one of the reasons I stopped being a pro-life protester is that usually when you are in a large group of people who are trying to have a conversation about this issue from a pro-life perspective, 90% of them do nothing but yell, "God, God, God," at the other side. God has nothing to do with this issue. My pro-life position has nothing to do with God. Whether or not it has nothing to do with whether or not there is a God. It doesn't matter. The procedure is either okay or not okay, and it's either killing a living human organism or it's not, and it either meets the standards of ethics and legal restrictions that we apply to other cases of living human organisms ending the lives of other living human organisms, or it doesn't. Logic is all you need to discuss this issue. But unfortunately, it's the least present factor in the discussion most of the time. But I think we've talked that to death, and if we could probably do a whole show on that too. I don't know that I want to, but we probably could. So I'm going to go on with the super chats. We have Altair Moat, who gave us $2 from New Zealand and said, "I use trees and you can't stop me." Oh, and I missed one. Yeah, we must have gotten a new one and it moved up. Schrodinger's cat gave us 5, I think that's pounds, 5 pounds. Said, "To anyone who believes women are incapable of violence, do a job where you face violence like me. When women get violent, they often use weapons." Oh my gosh. I have a friend who's a teacher in an inner city school system where they are very careful to make sure the students do not bring conventional weapons to school. She had a kid in her class end up in the ER because a girl took one of those rulers, those metal rulers that they use in art class, and just slashed the hell out of her with it. Just a ruler, a school tool for learning, and slashed the hell out of her with it. Probably one of the most violent things I ever did in school was an individual who would not stop grabbing and punching and pinching and stuff. I turned around and hit him over the head with my math book. So yeah, weapons get used by women a lot. Or girls, little girls even. Tyler Preston gave us $5 and said, screaming like Captain Henry Rhodes from Day of the Dead. Power-hungry tyrant screaming, I'm running this monkey farm now, Frankenstein. Okay. Miles Kinslow gave us $10 and said, hey guys, totally agree. I never hear responsibility on the woman's part in the abortion debate. Getting pregnant is a series of steps. And that's, like, my position on abortion is basically that the problem will be solved by developing accountability in girls and women to the degree that they catch up with men. Accountability for themselves and accountability for their knowledge and understanding of their biology and the results of using it. This is why I don't think it's necessary. Now, I do recognize that saying the law isn't going to affect women's habits with respect to abortion without that is saying something pretty nasty about women. The sad thing is it's true. I'm gonna also mention a couple of chats we got that I just thought were particularly thoughtful. One of them is Faux Pas T pointed out, morality is usually about creating permission to cause harm. And I don't know necessarily how complete that is or how universal that is, but I do know that I have seen morality frequently and broadly used in exactly that way. And it's an interesting thing to notice and pay attention to, so I wanted to mention it. The other one is Joachim Partek, who said, I haven't seen anyone beat up at a bathroom since public school. And why does it happen in public school bathrooms? An overbearing, omnipresent authority that keeps people from addressing their issues. And that's just another good point that I wanted to see mentioned. With that, we now have a 3-hour sausage. So I'm going to end the show here. Anybody have any last words before I end the show?
No! Don't end it! Yes, please do.
Okay. And with that, thanks you guys for helping contribute to the 3-hour sausage. Thanks everybody for listening, and thanks to everybody who works so hard in the background to help make HBR Talk happen. And good night, all.